Section 20 of the Aeneid. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Aeneid by Virgil. Translated by J.W. MacHale. Book 10th. The Battle on the Beach, Part 2. Meanwhile, Turnus' gracious sister bids him take Lausus' room, and his fleet chariot parts the ranks. When he saw his comrades, "It is time," he cried, "to stay from battle. I alone must assail Pallas. To me and none other Pallas is due. I would his father himself were here to see." So speaks he, and his Rutulians draw back from a level space at his bidding. But then, as they withdrew, he, wondering at the haughty command, stands in amaze at Turnus, his eyes scanning the vast frame, and his fierce glance perusing him from afar. And with these words he returns the words of the monarch: "For me, my praise shall even now be in the lordly spoils I win, or in illustrious death. My father will bear calmly either lot. Away with menaces." He speaks, and advances into the level ring. The Arcadians' blood gathers chill about their hearts. Turnus leaps from his chariot and prepares to close with him. And as a lion sees from some lofty outlook a bull stand far off on the plain revolving battle, and flies at him, even such to see is Turnus' coming. When Pallas deemed him within reach of a spear throw, he advances, if so chance may assist the daring of his overmatched strength, and thus cries into the depth of sky: "By my father's hospitality and the board whereto thou camest a wanderer, on thee I call, Alcides. Be favourable to my high emprise. Let Turnus even in death discern me stripping his blood-stained armour, and his swooning eyes endure the sight of his conqueror." Alcides heard him, and deep in his heart he stifled a heavy sigh, and let idle tears fall. Then with kindly words the father accosts his son: "Each hath his own appointed day. Short and irrecoverable is the span of life for all. But to spread renown by deeds is the task of valour. Under high Troy town many and many a god's son fell. Nay, mine own child Sarpedon likewise perished. Turnus too his own fate summons, and his allotted period hath reached the goal." So speaks he, and turns his eyes away from the Rutulian fields. But Pallas hurls his spear with all his strength, and pulls his sword flashing out of the hollow scabbard. The flying spear lights where the armour rises high above the shoulder, and forcing a way through the shield's rim, ceased not till it drew blood from the mighty Turnus. At this Turnus long poises the spear shaft with its sharp steel head, and hurls it on Pallas with these words: "See thou if our weapon have not a keener point." He ended, but for all the shield's plating of iron and brass, for all the bull hide that covers it round about, the quivering spearhead smashes it fair through and through, passes the guard of the corslet, and pierces the breast with a gaping hole. He tears the warm weapon from the wound, in vain. Together and at once life-blood and sense follow it. He falls heavily on the ground, his armour clashes over him, and his blood-stained face sinks in death on the hostile soil. And Turnus standing over him: "Arcadians," he cries, "remember these my words, and bear them to Evander. I send him back his Pallas, as was due. All the meed of the tomb, all the solace of sepulture I give freely. Dearly must he pay his welcome to Aeneas." And with these words, planting his left foot on the dead, he tore away the broad heavy sword belt engraven with a tale of crime, the array of grooms foully slain together on their bridal night, and the nuptial chambers dabbled with blood, which Clonus, son of Eurytus, had wrought richly in gold. Now Turnus exults in spoiling him of it, and rejoices at his prize. Ah, spirit of man, ignorant of fate and the allotted future, or to keep bounds when elate with prosperity, the day will come when Turnus shall desire to have bought Pallas' safety at a great ransom, and curse the spoils of this fatal day. But with many moans and tears Pallas' comrades lay him on his shield, and bear him away amid their ranks. O grief and glory and grace of the Father, to whom thou shalt return! This one day sent thee first to war, this one day takes thee away, while yet thou leavest heaped high thy Rutulian dead. And now no rumour of the dreadful loss, but a surer messenger flies to Aeneas, telling him his troops are on the thin edge of doom. It is time to succour the routed Teucrians. He mows down all that meets him, and hews a broad path through their columns with furious sword, as he seeks thee, O Turnus, in thy fresh pride of slaughter. Pallas, Evander, all flash before his eyes. The board whereto but then he had first come a wanderer, and the clasped hands. Here 4 of Sulmo's children, as many more of Ufen's nurture, are taken by him alive to slaughter in sacrifice to the shade below, and slake the flames of the pyre with captive blood. Next he levelled his spear full on Magus from far. He stoops cunningly, the spear flies quivering over him, and clasping his knees he speaks thus beseechingly: By thy father's ghost, by Iülus thy growing hope, I entreat thee, save this life for a child and a parent. My house is stately, deep in it lies buried wealth of engraven silver, I have masses of wrought and unwrought gold. The victory of Troy does not turn on this, nor will a single life make so great a difference. He ended. To him Aeneas thus returns answer: All the wealth of silver and gold thou tellest of, spare thou for thy children. Turnus hath broken off this thy trafficking in war, even then when Pallas fell. Thus judges the ghost of my father Anchises, thus Iülus. So speaking, he grasps his helmet with his left hand, and bending back his neck, drives his sword up to the hilt in the suppliant. Hard by is Haemonides, priest of Phoebus and Trivia, his temples wound with the holy ribboned chaplet, all glittering in white-robed array. Him he meets and chases down the plain, and standing over his fallen foe, slaughters him and wraps him in great darkness. Serestus gathers the armour and carries it away on his shoulders, a trophy, King Gradivus, to thee. Caeculus, born of Vulcan's race, and Umbro, who comes from the Marsian hills, fill up the line. The Dardanian rushes full on them. His sword had hewn off Angzur's left arm, with all the circle of the shield. He had uttered brave words, and deemed his prowess would second his vaunts, and perchance with spirit lifted up had promised himself hoar age and length of years, when Tarquitus in the pride of his glittering arms met his fiery course, whom the nymph Dryope had borne to Faunus, haunter of the woodland. Drawing back his spear, he pins the ponderous shield to the corslet, then, as he vainly pleaded and would say many a thing, strikes his head to the ground, and rolling away the warm body, cries thus over his enemy: Lie there now, terrible one! No mother's love shall lay thee in the sod, or place thy limbs beneath thine heavy ancestral tomb. To birds of prey shalt thou be left, or borne down sunk in the eddying water, where hungry fish shall suck thy wounds. Next he sweeps on Antaeus and Lucus, the first of Turnus' train, and brave Numa and tawny-haired Camas, born of noble Volscens, who was wealthiest in land of the Ausonians and reigned in silent Amyclae. Even as Aegeon, who, men say, had 100 arms, 100 hands, 50 mouths, and breasts ablaze with fire, and arrayed against Jove's thunders as many clashing shields and drawn swords, so Aeneas, when once his sword's point grew warm, rages victorious over all the field. Nay, lo! he darts full in face on Niphaeus' 4-horse chariot. Before his long strides and dreadful cry they turned in terror and dashed back, throwing out their driver and tearing the chariot down the beach. Meanwhile the brothers Lucagus and Liger drive up with their pair of white horses. Lucagus valiantly waves his drawn sword, while his brother wheels his horses with the rein. Aeneas, wrathful at their mad onslaught, rushes on them, towering high with levelled spear. To him Liger: Not Diomedes' horses dost thou discern, nor Achilles' chariot, nor the plains of Phrygia. Now on this soil of ours the war and thy life shall end together. Thus fly mad Liger's random words, but not in words does the Trojan hero frame his reply, for he hurls his javelin at the foe. As Lucagus spurred on his horses, bending forward over the whip, with left foot advanced ready for battle, the spear passes through the lower rim of his shining shield and pierces his left groin, knocks him out of the chariot, and stretches him in death on the fields. To him good Aeneas speaks in bitter words: Lucagus, no slackness in thy coursers' flight hath betrayed thee, or vain shadow of the foe turned them back. Thyself thou leapest off the harnessed wheels. In such wise he spoke, and caught the horses. His brother, slipping down from the chariot, pitiably outstretched helpless hands. Ah, by the parents who gave thee birth, great Trojan, spare this life and pity my prayer. More was he pleading, but Aeneas, not such were the words thou wert uttering. Die, and be brother undivided from brother. With that his sword's point pierces the breast where the life lies hid. Thus the Dardanian captain dealt death over the plain, like some raging torrent stream or black whirlwind. At last the boy Ascanius and his troops burst through the ineffectual leaguer and issue from the camp. Meanwhile Jupiter breaks silence to accost Juno. O sister and wife best beloved, it is Venus, as thou deemedst, nor is thy judgment astray, who sustains the forces of Troy, not their own valour of hand in war, and untamable spirit and endurance in peril. To whom Juno, beseechingly: Why, fair my lord, vexest thou one sick at heart and trembling at thy bitter words? If that force were in my love that once was, and that was well, never had thine omnipotence denied me leave to withdraw Turnus from battle and preserve him for his father Daunus in safety. Now let him perish, and pay forfeit to the Trojans of his innocent blood. Yet he traces his birth from our name, and Pilumnus was his father in the 4th generation, and oft and again his bountiful hand hath heaped thy courts with gifts. To her the king of high heaven thus briefly spoke: If thy prayer for him is delay of present death and respite from his fall, and thou dost understand that I ordain it thus, remove thy Turnus in flight, and snatch him from the fate that is upon him. For so much indulgence there is room, but if any ampler grace mask itself in these thy prayers, and thou dreamest of change in the whole movement of the war, idle is the hope thou nursest. And Juno weeping: Ah, yet, if thy mind were gracious where thy lips are stern, and this gift of life might remain confirmed to Turnus. Now his portion is bitter and guiltless death, or I wander idly from the truth. Yet, oh, that I rather deluded myself with false alarms, and thou who canst wouldst bend thy course to better counsels. These words uttered, she darted through the air straight from high heaven, cloud-girt in driving tempest, and sought the Ilian ranks and camp of Laurentum. Then the goddess, strange and ominous to see, fashions into the likeness of Aeneas a thin and pithless shade of hollow mist, decks it with Dardanian weapons, and gives it the mimicry of shield and divine helmet plume, gives unsubstantial words and senseless utterance, and the mould and motion of his tread, like shapes rumoured to flit when death is past, or dreams that delude the slumbering senses. But in front of the battle ranks the phantom dances rejoicingly, and with arms and mocking accents provokes the foe. Turnus hastens up and sends his spear whistling from far on it. It gives back and turns its footsteps. Then indeed Turnus, when he believed Aeneas, turned and fled from him, and his spirit madly drank in the elusive hope. Whither fliest thou, Aeneas? Forsake not thy plighted bridal chamber. This hand shall give thee the land thou hast sought overseas. So clamouring he pursues, and brandishes his drawn sword, and sees not that his rejoicing is drifting with the winds. The ship lay haply moored to a high ledge of rock, with ladders run out and gangway ready, wherein King Osinius sailed from the coasts of Clusium. Here the fluttering phantom of flying Aeneas darts and hides itself. Nor is Turnus slack to follow. He overleaps the barriers and springs across the high gangways. Scarcely had he lighted on the prow. The daughter of Saturn snaps the hawser, and the ship, parted from her cable, runs out on the ebbing tide. And him Aeneas seeks for battle and finds not, and sends many a man that meets him to death. Then the light phantom seeks not yet any further hiding place, but flitting aloft melts in a dark cloud, and a blast comes down meanwhile and sweeps Turnus through the seas. He looks back witless of his case and thankless for his salvation, and wailing stretches both hands to heaven. Father omnipotent, was I so guilty in thine eyes, and is this the punishment thou hast ordained? Whither am I born? Whence came I? What flight is this, or in what guise do I return? Shall I look again on the camp or walls of Laurentum? What of that array of men who followed me to arms, whom, O horrible, I have abandoned all amid a dreadful death? And now I see the stragglers and catch the groans of those who fall. What do I? Or how may earth ever yawn for me deep enough? Do you rather, O winds, be pitiful, carry my bark on rock or reef. It is I, Turnus, who desire and implore you. Or drive me on the cruel shoals of the Syrtis, where no Rutulian may follow nor rumour know my name. Thus speaking, he wavers in mind this way and that. Maddened by the shame, shall he plunge on his sword's harsh point and drive it through his side, or fling himself among the waves, and seek by swimming to gain the winding shore, again to return on the Trojan arms? Thrice he essayed either way, thrice queenly Juno checked and restrained him in pity of heart. Cleaving the deep, he floats with the tide down the flood, and is borne on to his father Daunus' ancient city. But meanwhile, at Jove's prompting, fiery Mezentius takes his place in the battle and assails the triumphant Teucrians. The Tyrrhene ranks gather round him, and all at once in unison shower their darts down on the hated foe. As a cliff that juts into the waste of waves, meeting the raging winds and breasting the deep, endures all the threatening force of sky and sea, itself fixed immovable, so he dashes to earth Hebrus, son of Dilicaon, and with him Latagus, and Palmus as he fled, catching Latagus full front in the face with a vast fragment of mountain rock, while Palmus he hamstrings and leaves him rolling helpless. His armour he gives Lausus to wear on his shoulders, and the plumes to fix on his crest. With them fall Avanthus the Phrygian, and Mimas, fellow and birthmate of Paris. For on one night Theano bore him to his father Amycus, and the queen, Cisseus' daughter, was delivered of Paris the firebrand. He sleeps in his father's city. Mimas lies a stranger on the Laurentian coast. And as the boar, driven by snapping hounds from the mountain heights, many a year hidden by Vesulus in his pines, many an one fed in the Laurentian marsh among the reedy forest, once come among the nets, halts and snorts savagely with shoulders bristling up, and none of them dare be wrathful or draw closer, but they shower from a safe distance their darts and cries. Even thus, none of those whose anger is righteous against Mezentius have courage to meet him with drawn weapon. Far off they provoke him with missiles and huge clamour, and he turns slow and fearless round about, grinding his teeth as he shakes the spears off his shield. From the bounds of ancient Corythus, Acron the Greek had come, leaving for exile a bride half won. Seeing him afar dealing confusion amid the ranks, in crimson plumes and his plighted wife's purple, as an unpastured lion often ranging the deep coverts for madness of hunger urges him, if he haply catches sight of a timorous roe or high-antlered stag, he gapes hugely for joy, and with mane on end clings crouching over its flesh, his cruel mouth bathed in reeking gore. So Mezentius darts lightly among the thick of the enemy. Hapless Acron goes down, and spurning the dark ground, gasps out his life, and covers the broken javelin with his blood. But the victor deigned not to bring down Orodes with the blind wound of his flying lance as he fled. Full face to face he meets him, and engages man with man, conqueror not by stealth but armed valour. Then, as with planted foot he thrust him off the spear, "O men," he cries, "Orodes lies low, no slight arm of the war." His comrades shout after him the glad battle chant. And the dying man, not unavenged nor long, whoso thou art, shalt thou be glad in victory. Thee too an equal fate marks down, and in these fields thou shalt soon lie. And smiling on him half wrathfully, Mezentius, now die thou, but of me let the Father of gods and King of men take counsel. So saying, he drew the weapon out of his body. Grim rest and iron slumber seal his eyes, his lids close on everlasting night. Caedicus slays Alcathous, Sacrator Hydaspes, Rapo Parthenius and the grim strength of Orses, Messapus Clonius and Ericetes, son of Lycaon, the one when his reinless horse stumbling had flung him to the ground, the other as they met on foot. And Agis the Lycian advanced only to be struck from horseback by Valerus, brave as his ancestry, and Thronius by Salius, and Salius by Nealces, with treacherous arrow-shot that stole from far. Now the heavy hand of war dealt equal woe and counterchange of death. In even balance conquerors and conquered slew and fell. Nor one nor other knows of retreat. The gods in Jove's house pity the vain rage of either, and all the agonizing of mortals. From one side Venus, from one opposite Juno, daughter of Saturn, looks on. Pale Tisiphone rages among the many thousand men, but now, brandishing his huge spear, Mezentius strides glooming over the plain, vast as Orion when with planted foot he cleaves his way through the vast pools of mid-ocean and his shoulder overtops the waves, or carrying an ancient mountain ash from the hilltops, paces the ground and hides his head among the clouds. So moves Mezentius, huge in arms. Aeneas, espying him in the deep columns, makes on to meet him. He remains, unterrified, awaiting his noble foe, steady in his own bulk, and measures with his eye the fair range for a spear. This right hand's divinity, and the weapon I poise and hurl, now be favourable. Thee, Lausus, I vow for the live trophy of Aeneas, dressed in the spoils stripped from the pirate's body. He ends, and throws the spear whistling from far. It flies on, glancing from the shield, and pierces illustrious Antores hard by him sidelong in the flank. Antores, companion of Hercules, who sent thither from Argos, had stayed by Evander and settled in an Italian town. Hapless he goes down with a wound not his own, and in death gazes on the sky, and Argos is sweet in his remembrance. Then good Aeneas throws his spear. Through the sheltering circle of threefold brass, through the canvas lining and fabric of triple-sewn bull-hide it went, and sank deep in his groin, yet carried not its strength home. Quickly Aeneas, joyful at the sight of the Tyrrhenian's blood, snatches his sword from his thigh, and presses hotly on his struggling enemy. Lausus saw, and groaned deeply for love of his dear father, and tears rolled over his face. Here will I not keep silence of thy hard death doom and thine excellent deeds, if in any wise things wrought in the old time may win belief, nor of thyself, O fitly remembered. He, helpless and trammelled, withdrew backward, the deadly spear-shaft trailing from his shield. The youth broke forward and plunged into the fight, and even as Aeneas' hand rose to bring down the blow, he caught up his point and held him in delay. His comrades follow up with loud cries. So the father may withdraw in shelter of his son's shield, while they shower their darts and bear back the enemy with missiles from a distance. Aeneas wrathfully keeps covered. And as when storm clouds pour down in streaming hail, all the ploughmen and country folk scatter off the fields, and the wayfarer cowers safe in his fortress, a stream's bank or deep arch of rock, while the rain falls, that they may do their day's labour when sunlight reappears. Thus under the circling storm of weapons Aeneas sustains the cloud of war till it thunders itself all away, and calls on Lausus, with chiding and menace. Whither runnest thou on thy death with daring beyond thy strength? Thine affection betrays thee into rashness. But none the less he leaps madly on, and now wrath rises higher and fiercer in the Dardanian captain, and the fates pass Lausus' last threads through their hand, for Aeneas drives the sword strongly right through him, up all its length. The point pierced the light shield that armed his assailant, and the tunic sewn by his mother with flexible gold. Blood filled his breast, and the life left the body and passed mourning through the air to the underworld. But when Anchises' son saw the look on the dying face, the face pale in wonderful wise, he sighed deeply in pity, and reached forth his hand, as the likeness of his own filial affection flashed across his soul. What now shall good Aeneas give thee? What, O poor boy, for this thy praise, for guerdon of a nature so noble? Keep for thine own the armour thou didst delight in, and I restore thee, if that matters aught at all, to the ghosts and ashes of thy parents. Yet thou shalt have this sad comfort in thy piteous death, thou fallest by great Aeneas' hand. Then, chiding his hesitating comrades, he lifts him from the ground, dabbling the comely ranged tresses with blood. Meanwhile his father, by the wave of the Tiber river, stanched his wound with water, and rested his body against a tree trunk. Hard by, his brazen helmet hangs from the boughs, and the heavy armour lies quietly on the meadow. Chosen men stand round. He, sick and panting, leans his neck and lets his beard spread down over his chest. Many a time he asks for Lausus, and sends many an one to call him back and carry a parent's sad commands. But Lausus his weeping comrades were bearing lifeless on his armour, mighty and mightily wounded to death. Afar the soul prophetic of ill knew their lamentation. He soils his grey hairs plenteously with dust, and stretches both hands on high, and clings on the dead. Was life's hold on me so sweet, O my son, that I let him I bore receive the hostile stroke in my room? Am I, thy father, saved by these wounds of thine, and living by thy death? Alas and woe! Now at last exile is bitter. Now the wound is driven deep, and I, even I, O my son, stained thy name with crime, driven in hatred from the throne and sceptre of my fathers. I owed vengeance to my country and my people's resentment. Might mine own guilty life but have paid it by every form of death. Now I live, and leave not yet man and day, but I will. As he speaks thus, he raises himself painfully on his thigh, and though the violence of the deep wound cripples him, yet unbroken he bids his horse be brought, his beauty, his comfort, that ever had carried him victorious out of war, and says these words to the grieving beast: Rebus, we have lived long, if aught at all lasts long with mortals. This day wilt thou either bring back in triumph the gory head and spoils of Aeneas, and we will avenge Lausus' agonies, or if no force opens a way, thou wilt die with me, for I deem not, bravest, thou wilt deign to bear an alien rule and a Teucrian lord. He spoke, and took his welcome seat on the back he knew, loading both hands with keen javelins, his head sheathed in glittering brass and shaggy horsehair plumes. Thus he galloped in. Through his heart sweep together the vast tides of shame and mingling madness and grief. And with that he thrice loudly calls Aeneas. Aeneas knew the call, and makes glad invocation. So the Father of gods speed me, so Apollo on high, do thou essay to close hand to hand? Thus much he utters, and moves up to meet him with levelled spear, and he: Why seek to frighten me, fierce man, now my son is gone? This was thy one road to my ruin. We shrink not from death, nor relent before any of the gods. Cease, for I come to my death, first carrying these gifts for thee. He spoke, and hurled a weapon at his enemy, then plants another, and yet another, as he darts round in a wide circle, but they are stayed on the boss of gold. Thrice he rode wheeling close round him by the left, and sent his weapons strongly in. Thrice the Trojan hero turns round, taking the grim forest on his brazen guard. Then, weary of lingering in delay on delay, and plucking out spearhead after spearhead, and hard pressed in the uneven match of battle, with much counselling of spirit now at last he bursts forth, and sends his spear at the war-horse between the hollows of the temples. The creature raises itself erect, beating the air with its feet, throws its rider, and coming down after him in an entangled mass, slips its shoulder as it tumbles forward. The cries of Trojans and Latins kindle the sky. Aeneas rushes up, drawing his sword from the scabbard, and thus above him: "Where now is gallant Mezentius and all his fierce spirit?" Thereto the Tyrrhenian, as he came to himself and gazing up drank the air of heaven: "Bitter foe, why these taunts and menaces of death? Naught forbids my slaughter. Neither on such terms came I to battle, nor did my Lausus make treaty for this between me and thee. This one thing I beseech thee, by whatsoever grace a vanquished enemy may claim, allow my body sepulture. I know I am girt by the bitter hatred of my people. Stay, I implore, their fury, and grant me and my son union in the tomb." So speaks he, and takes the sword in his throat unfalteringly, and the lifeblood spreads in a wave over his armour. End of section 20.
Section 21 of the Aeneid. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by K. Hand. The Aeneid by Virgil, translated by J.W. McHale. Book 11th, The Council of the Latins and the Life and Death of Camilla, Part 1. Meanwhile dawn arose forth of ocean. Aeneas, though the charge presses to give a space for burial of his comrades, and his mind is in the tumult of death, began to pay the gods his vows of victory with the breaking of the east. He plants on a mound a mighty oak with boughs lopped away on every hand, and arrays it in the gleaming arms stripped from Mezentius the captain, a trophy to thee, mighty lord of war. He fixes on it the plumes dripping with blood, the broken spears, and the corslet struck and pierced in 12 places. He ties the shield of brass on his left hand, and hangs from his neck the ivory sword. Then among his joyous comrades, for all the throng of his captains girt him close about, he begins in these words of cheer: "The greatest deed is done, O men, be all fear gone for what remains. These are the spoils of a haughty king, the first fruits won from him. My hands have sent Mezentius here. Now our way lies to the walls of the Latin king. Prepare your arms and courage, and let your hopes anticipate the war. Let no ignorant delay hinder or tardy thoughts of fear keep us back, so soon as heaven grant us to pluck up the standards and lead our army from the camp. Meanwhile let us commit to earth the unburied bodies of our comrades, since deep in Acheron this honour is left alone. Go," says he, "grace with the last gifts those noble souls whose blood won us this land of ours. And first let Pallas be sent to Evander's mourning city, he whose valour failed not when the day of darkness took him, and the bitter wave of death." So speaks he weeping, and retraces his steps to the door, where aged Acoetes watched Pallas' lifeless body laid out for burial. Once armour-bearer to Evander in Parrhasia, but now gone forth with darker omens, appointed attendant to his darling foster–child. Around is the whole train of servants with a crowd of Trojans, and the Ilian women with hair unbound in mourning after their fashion. When Aeneas entered at the high doorway they beat their breasts and raise a loud wail aloft, and the palace moans to their grievous lamentation. Himself, when he saw the pillowed head and fair face of Pallas, and on his smooth breast the gaping wound of the Ausonian spearhead, speaks thus with welling tears: "Did Fortune in her joyous coming," he cries, "O luckless boy, grudge thee the sight of our realm, and a triumphal entry to thy father's dwelling? Not this promise of thee had I given to Evander thy sire at my departure, when he embraced me as I went and bade me speed to a wide empire, and yet warned me in fear that the men were valiant, the people obstinate in battle. And now he, fast ensnared by empty hope, perchance offers vows and heaps gifts on his altars. We, a mourning train, go in hollow honour by his corpse, who now owes no more to aught in heaven. Unhappy! thou wilt see thy son cruelly slain. Is this our triumphal return awaited? Is this my strong assurance? Ah me, what a shield is lost, mine, Iülus, to Ausonia and to thee! This lament done, he bids raise the piteous body, and sends 1,000 men chosen from all his army for the last honour of escort, to mingle in the father's tears. A small comfort and a great sorrow, yet the unhappy parents do. Others quickly plait a soft wicker bier of arbutus rods and oak shoots, and shadow the heaped pillows with a leafy covering. Here they lay him, high on their rustic strewing, even as some tender violet or drooping hyacinth blossom plucked by a maiden's finger, whose sheen and whose grace is not yet departed, but no more does earth the mother feed it or lend it strength. Then Aeneas bore forth 2 purple garments stiff with gold, that Sidonian Dido's own hands, happy over their work, had once wrought for him, and shot the warp with delicate gold. One of these he sadly folds round him, a last honour, and veils in its covering the tresses destined to the fire, and heaps up beside many a Laurentine battle prize, and bids his spoils pass forth in long train; with them the horses and arms whereof he had stripped the enemy, and those with hands tied behind their back, whom he would send as nether offering to his ghost, and sprinkle the blood of their slaying on the flame. Also he bids his captains carry stems dressed in the armour of the foe, and fix on them the hostile names. Unhappy Acoetes is led along, outworn with age; he smites his breast and rends his face, and flings himself forward all along the ground. Likewise they lead forth the chariot bathed in Rutulian blood; behind goes weeping Aethon the war horse, his trappings laid away, and big drops wet his face. Others bear his spear and helmet, for all else is Turnus' prize. Then follow in mourning array the Teucrians and all the Tyrrhenians and the Arcadians with arms reversed. When the whole long escorting file had taken its way, Aeneas stopped, and sighing deep, pursued thus: 'Once again war's dreadful destiny calls us hence to other tears. Hail thou for evermore, O princely Pallas, and for evermore farewell.' And without more words he bent his way to the high walls and advanced towards his camp. And now envoys were there from the Latin city with wreathed boughs of olive, praying him of his grace to restore the dead that lay strewn by the sword over the plain, and let them go to their earthly grave. No war lasts with men conquered and bereft of breath. Let this indulgence be given to men once called friends and fathers of their brides. To them Aeneas grants leave in kind and courteous wise, spurning not their prayer, and goes on in these words: 'What spite of fortune, O Latins, hath entangled you in the toils of war, and made you fly our friendship? Plead you for peace to the lifeless bodies that the battle lot hath slain? I would fain grant it even to the living. Neither have I come but because destiny had given me this place to dwell in, nor wage I war with your people. Your king it is who hath broken our covenant and preferred to trust himself to Turnus' arms. Fitter it were that Turnus had faced death to day. If he will fight out the war and expel the Teucrians, it had been well to meet me here in arms, so had he lived to whom life were granted of heaven or his own right hand. Now go and kindle the fire beneath your hapless countrymen.' Aeneas ended. They stood dumb and silent, with faces bent steadfastly in mutual gaze. Then aged Drances, ever young Turnus' assailant in hatred and accusation, with the words of his mouth thus answers him again: 'O Trojan, great in renown, yet greater in arms, with what praises may I extol thy divine goodness? Shall thy righteousness first wake my wonder, or thy toils in war? We indeed will gratefully carry these words to our father's city, and if fortune grant a way, will make thee at one with King Latinus. Let Turnus seek his own alliances. Nay, it will be our delight to rear the massy walls of destiny and stoop our shoulders under the stones of Troy.' He ended thus, and all with one voice murmured assent. 12 days' truce is struck, and in meditation of the peace Teucrians and Latins stray mingling unharmed on the forest heights. The tall ash echoes to the axe's strokes; they overturn pines that soar into the sky, and busily cleave oaken logs and scented cedar with wedges, and drag mountain ashes on their groaning waggons. And now flying Rumour, harbinger of the heavy woe, fills Evander and Evander's house and city with the same voice that but now told of Pallas victorious over Latium. The Arcadians stream to the gates, snatching funeral torches after their ancient use; the road gleams with the long line of flame, and parts the fields with a broad pathway of light. The arriving crowd of Phrygians meets them and mingles in mourning array. When the matrons saw all the train approach their dwellings, they kindle the town with loud wailing. But no force may withhold Evander. He comes amid them. The bier is set down. He flings himself on Pallas, and clasps him with tears and sighs, and scarcely at last does grief leave his voice's utterance free. Other than this, O Pallas, was thy promise to thy father, that thou wouldst not plunge recklessly into the fury of battle. I knew well how strong was the fresh pride of arms and the sweetness of honour in a first battle. Ah, unhappy first fruits of his youth and bitter prelude of the war upon our borders! Ah, vows and prayers of mine that no god heard! And thou, pure crown of wifehood, happy that thou art dead and not spared for this sorrow. But I have outgone my destiny in living, to stay here the survivor of my child. Would I had followed the allied arms of Troy, to be overwhelmed by Rutulian weapons. Would my life have been given, and I, and not my Pallas, were borne home in this procession. I would not blame you, O Teucrians, nor our treaty and the friendly hands we clasped. Our old age had that appointed debt to pay. Yet if untimely death awaited my son, it will be good to think he fell leading the Teucrians into Latium, and slew his Volscian thousands before he fell. Nay, no other funeral than this would I deem thy due, my Pallas, than good Aeneas does, than the mighty Phrygians, than the Tyrrhene captains and all the army of Tyrrhenia. Great are the trophies they bring on whom thine hand deals death. Thou also, Turnus, wert standing now, a great trunk dressed in arms, had his age and his strength of years equalled thine. But why, unhappy, do I delay the Trojan arms? Go, and forget not to carry this message to your king. Thine hand it is that keeps me lingering in a life that is hateful since Pallas fell, and Turnus is the debt thou seest son and father claim. For thy virtue and thy fortune this scope alone is left. I ask not joy in life, I may not, but to carry this to my son deep in the underworld. Meanwhile dawn had raised her gracious light on weary men, bringing back task and toil. Now lord Aeneas, how Tarchon, have built the pyres on the winding shore. Hither in ancestral fashion hath each borne the bodies of his kin. The dark fire is lit beneath, and the vapour hides high heaven in gloom. Thrice, girt in glittering arms, they have marched about the blazing piles, thrice compassed on horseback the sad fire of death, and uttered their wail. Tears fall fast upon earth and armour, cries of men and blare of trumpets roll skyward. Then some fling on the fire Latin spoils stripped from the slain, helmets and shapely swords, bridles and glowing chariot wheels; others familiar gifts, the very shields and luckless weapons of the dead. Around are slain in sacrifice oxen many in number, and bristly swine and cattle gathered out of all the country are slaughtered over the flames. Then crowding the shore, they gaze on their burning comrades, and guard the embers of the pyres, and cannot tear themselves away till dewy night wheels on the star-spangled glittering sky. Therewithal the unhappy Latins far apart build countless pyres and bury many bodies of men in the ground; and many more they lift and bear away to the neighbouring country, or send them back to the city; the rest, a vast heap of undistinguishable slaughter, they burn uncounted and unhonoured. On all sides the broad fields gleam with the crowded rivalry of fires. The third dawn had rolled away the chill shadow from the sky; mournfully they piled high the ashes and mingled bones from the embers, and heaped a load of warm earth above them. Now in the dwellings of rich Latinus' city the noise is loudest, and most the long wail. Here mothers and their sons' unhappy brides, here beloved sisters sad-hearted, and orphan boys curse the disastrous war and Turnus' bridal, and bid him his own self arm and decide the issue with the sword, since he claims for himself the first rank in the lordship of Italy. Drances fiercely embitters their cry, and vouches that Turnus alone is called, alone is claimed for battle. Yet therewith many a diverse worded counsel is for Turnus, and the great name of the queen overshadows him, and he rises high in renown of trophies fitly won. Among their stir, and while confusion is fiercest, lo, to crown all, the envoys from the great Diomedes' city bring their gloomy message. Nothing is to come of all the toil and labour spent; gifts and gold and strong entreaties have been of no avail. Latium must seek other arms, or sue for peace to the Trojan king. For heavy grief King Latinus himself swoons away. The wrath of heaven and the fresh graves before his eyes warn him that Aeneas is borne on by fate's evident will. So he sends imperial summons to his high council, the foremost of his people, and gathers them within his lofty courts. They assemble, and stream up the crowded streets to the royal dwelling. Latinus, eldest in years and first in royalty, sits amid them with cheerless brow, and bids the envoys sent back from the Aetolian city tell the news they bring, and demands a full and ordered reply. Then tongues are hushed, and Venulus, obeying his word, thus begins to speak: 'We have seen, O citizens, Diomede in his Argive camp, and outsped our way and passed all its dangers, and touched the hand whereunder the land of Ilium fell. He was founding a town, named it Agrippa after his ancestral people, on the conquered fields of Iapygian Garganus. After we entered in, and license of open speech was given, we lay forth our gifts. We instruct him of our name and country, who are its invaders, and why we are drawn to Arpi. He heard us, and replied thus with face unstirred: O fortunate races, realm of Saturn, Ausonians of old, how doth fortune vex your quiet and woo you to tempt wars you know not? We that have drawn sword on the fields of Ilium, I forbear to tell the drains of war beneath her high walls, the men sunken in yonder Simois, have all over the world paid to the full our punishment and the reward of guilt, a crew Priam's self might pity, as Minerva's baleful star knows, and as the Euboic reefs and Caphaerus' revenge. From that war-faring driven to alien shores, Menelaus, son of Atreus, is in exile far as Proteus' pillars. Ulysses hath seen the Cyclops of Aetna. Shall I make mention of the realm of Neoptolemus, and Idomeneus' household gods overthrown? Or of the Locrians who dwell on the Libyan beach? Even the lord of Mycene, the mighty Achaeans' general, sank on his own threshold edge under his accursed wife's hand, where the adulterer crouched over conquered Asia. Ay, or that the gods grudged it to me to return to my ancestral altars, to see the bride of my desire, and lovely Calydon. Now likewise sights of appalling presage pursue me; my comrades, lost to me, have soared winging into the sky, and flit birds about the rivers. Ah me, dread punishment of my people! And fill the cliffs with their melancholy cries. This it was I had to look for even from the time when I madly assailed celestial limbs with steel, and sullied the hand of Venus with a wound. Do not, do not urge me to such battles. Neither have I any war with Troy since her towers are overthrown, nor do I remember with delight the woes of old. Turn to Aeneas with the gifts you bear to me from your ancestral borders. We have stood to face his grim weapons, and met him hand to hand. Believe one who hath proved it, how mightily he rises over his shield, in what a whirlwind he hurls his spear. Had the land of Ida borne two more like him, Dardanus had marched to attack the towns of Inachus, and Greece were mourning fate's reverse. In all our delay before that obstinate Trojan city, it was Hector and Aeneas whose hand stayed the Grecian victory, and bore back its advance to the 10th year. Both were splendid in courage, both eminent in arms. Aeneas was first in duty. Let your hands join in treaty as they may, but beware that your weapons close not with his. Thou hast heard, most gracious king, at once what is the king's answer, and what his counsel for our great struggle.' Scarcely thus the envoys, when a diverse murmur ran through the troubled lips of the Ausonians, even as, when rocks delay some running river, it plashes in the barred pool, and the banks murmur nigh to the babbling wave. So soon as their minds were quieted and their hurrying lips hushed, the king, first calling on the gods, begins from his lofty throne: 'Ere now could I wish, O Latins, we had determined our course of state, and it had been better thus, not to meet in council at such a time as now, with the enemy seated before our walls. We wage an ill-timed war, fellow citizens, with a divine race, invincible, unbroken in battle, who brook not even when conquered to drop the sword. If you had hope in appeal to Aetolian arms, abandon it. Though each man's hope is his own, you discern how narrow a path it is. Beyond that you see with your eyes and handle with your hands the total ruin of our fortunes. I blame no one. What valour's utmost could do is done. We have fought with our whole kingdom's strength. Now I will unfold what I doubtfully advise and purpose, and with your attention instruct you of it in brief. There is an ancient land of mine bordering the Tuscan river, stretching far westward beyond Sicanian borders. Auruncans and Rutilians sow on it, work the stiff hills with the ploughshare, and pasture them where they are roughest. Let all this tract with a pine-clad belt of mountain height pass to the Teucrians in friendship. Let us name fair terms of treaty, and invite them as allies to our realm. Let them settle, if they desire it so, and found a city. But if they have a mind to try other coasts and another people, and can abide to leave our soil, let us build twice 10 ships of Italian oak, or as many more as they can man. Timber lies at the water's edge for all. Let them assign the number and fashion of the vessels, and we will supply brass, labor, dockyards. Further, it is our will that 100 ambassadors of the highest rank in Latium shall go to bear our words and ratify the treaty, holding forth in their hands the boughs of peace, and carrying for gifts weights of gold and ivory, and the chair and striped robe, our royal array. Give counsel openly, and succour our exhausted state. Then Drances again, he whose jealous ill will was wrought to anger and stung with bitterness by Turnus' fame, lavish of wealth and quick of tongue, though his hand was cold in war, held no empty counsellor and potent in faction. His mother's rank ennobled a lineage whose paternal source was obscure. Rises, and with these words heaps and heightens their passion. Dark to no man and needing no voice of ours, O gracious king, is that whereon thou takest counsel. All confess they know how our nation's fortune sways, but their words are choked. Let him grant freedom of speech and abate his breath, he by whose disastrous government and perverse way I will speak out, though he menace me with arms and death we see so many stars of battle gone down, and all our cities sunk in mourning, while he, confident in flight, assails the Trojan camp and makes heaven quail before his arms. Add yet one to those gifts of thine, to all the riches thou bidst us send or promise to the Dardanians, most gracious of kings, but one. Let no man's passion overbear thee from giving thine own daughter to an illustrious son and a worthy marriage, and binding this peace by perpetual treaty. Yet if we are thus terror-stricken heart and soul, let us implore him in person plead him of his grace to give way, to restore king and country their proper right. Why again and again hurlest thou these unhappy citizens on peril so evident, O source and spring of Latium's woe? In war is no safety. Peace we all implore of thee, O Turnus, and the one pledge that makes peace inviolable. I the first, I whom thou picturest thine enemy, as I care not if I am, see, I bow at thy feet. Pity thine allies, relent, and retire before thy conqueror. Enough have we seen of rout and death, and desolation over our broad lands. Or if glory stir thee, if such strength kindle in thy breast, and if a palace so delight thee for thy dower, be bold, and advance stout-hearted upon the foe. We verily, that Turnus may have his royal bride, must lie scattered on the plains, worthless lives, a crowd unburied and unwept. Do thou also, if thou hast aught of might, if the war god be in thee as in thy fathers, look him in the face who challenges." At these words Turnus' passion blazed out; he utters a groan, and breaks forth thus in deep accents: "Copious indeed, Drances, and fluent is ever thy speech at the moment war calls for action, and when the fathers are summoned thou art there the first. But we need no words to fill our senate house, safely as thou wingest them while the mounded walls keep off the enemy, and the trenches swim not yet with blood. Thunder on in rhetoric, thy wonted way; accuse thou me of fear, Drances, since thine hand hath heaped so many Teucrians in slaughter, and thy glorious trophies dot the fields. Trial is open of what live valour can do, nor indeed is our foe far to seek. On all sides they surround our walls. Are we going to meet them? Why linger? Will thy bravery ever be in that windy tongue and those timorous feet of thine? My conqueror? Shall any justly flout me as conquered, who see Tiber swoln fuller with Ilian blood, and all the house and people of Evander lay low, and the Arcadians stripped of their armour? Not such did Bitias and huge Pandarus prove me, and the 1,000 men whom on one day my conquering hand sent down to hell, shut as I was in their walls and closed in the enemy's ramparts. In war is no safety. Fool! Be thy boding on the Dardan's head and thine own fortunes. Go on, cease not to throw all into confusion with thy terrors, to exalt the strength of a twice vanquished race, and abase the arms of Latinus before it. Now the princes of the Myrmidons tremble before Phrygian arms; now Tydeus' son and Achilles of Larissa and Aufidus river recoils from the Adriatic wave. Or when the scheming villain pretends to shrink at my abuse, and sharpens calumny by terror, never shall this hand, keep quiet, rob thee of such a soul; with thee let it abide, and dwell in that breast of thine. Now I return to thee, my lord, and thy weighty resolves. If thou dost repose no further hope in our arms, if all hath indeed left us, and one repulse been our utter ruin, and our fortune is beyond recovery, let us plead for peace and stretch forth unarmed hands. Yet had we aught of our wonted manhood, his toil beyond all other is blessed, and his spirit eminent, who rather than see it thus hath fallen prone in death and once bitten the ground. But if we have yet resources, and an army still unbroken, and cities and people of Italy remain for our aid; but if even the Trojans have won their glory at great cost of blood, they too have their deaths, and the storm fell equally on all, why do we shamefully faint even on the threshold? Why does a shudder seize our limbs before the trumpet sound? Often do the days and the varying change of toiling time restore prosperity. Often fortune in broken visits makes man her sport and again establishes him. The Aetolian of Arpi will not help us, but Messapus will, and Tolumnius the fortunate, and the captains sent by many a nation; nor will fame be scant to follow the flower of Latium and the Laurentine land. Camilla the Volscian too is with us, leading her train of cavalry, squadrons splendid in brass. But if I only am claimed by the Teucrians for combat, if that is your pleasure, and I am the barrier to the public good, victory does not so hate and shun my hands that I should renounce any enterprise for so great a hope. I shall meet him in courage. Did he outmatch great Achilles and wear arms like his forged by Vulcan hands? To you and to my father Latinus, I, Turnus, unexcelled in bravery by any of old, consecrate my life. Aeneas calls on him alone. Let him, I implore, let not Drances rather appease with his life this wrath of heaven, if such it be, or win the renown of valour. End of Section 21. Section 22 of the Aeneid. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by K. Hand. The Aeneid by Virgil. Translated by J.W. McHale. Book 11th. The Council of the Latins and the Life and Death of Camilla, Part 2. Thus they one with another strove together in uncertainty. Aeneas moved from his camp to battle. Lo, a messenger rushes spreading confusion through the royal house, and fills the town with great alarms. The Teucrians, ranged in battle line with the Tyrrhene forces, are marching down by the Tiber river and filling the plain. Immediately spirits are stirred and hearts shaken and wrath roused in fierce excitement among the crowd. Hurrying hands grasp at arms, for arms their young men clamour; the fathers shed tears and mutter gloomily. With that a great noise rises aloft in diverse contention, even as when flocks of birds haply settle on a lofty grove, or swans utter their hoarse cry among the vocal pools on the fish–filled river of Padusa. Yes, citizens, cries Turnus, seizing his time, gather in council and sit praising peace, while they rush on dominion in arms. Without more words he sprung up and issued swiftly from the high halls. Thou Volusus, he cries, bid the Volscian battalions arm, and lead out the Rutilians. Messapus and Chorus with thy brother, spread your armed cavalry widely over the plain. Let a division entrench the city gates and man the towers; the rest of our array attack with me where I command. The whole town goes rushing to the walls. Lord Latinus himself, dismayed by the woeful emergency, quits the council and puts off his high designs, and chides himself sorely for not having given Aeneas unasked welcome, and made him son and bulwark of the city. Some entrench the gates, or bring up supply of stones and poles. The hoarse clarion utters the ensanguined note of war. A motley ring of boys and matrons girdle the walls. Therewithal the queen with a crown of mothers ascends bearing gifts to Pallas' towered temple, and by her side goes maiden Lavinia, source of all that woe, her beautiful eyes cast down. The mothers enter in, and while the temple steams with their incense, pour from the high doorway their mournful cry: Maiden armimpotent Tritonian, sovereign of war, break with thine hand the spear of the Phrygian plunderer, hurl him prone to earth, and dash him down beneath our lofty gates. Turnus arrays himself in hot haste for battle, and even now hath done on his sparkling breastplate with its flickering scales of brass, and clasped his golden greaves, his brows yet bare and his sword buckled to his side. He runs down from the fortress height glittering in gold, and exultantly anticipates the foe. Thus when a horse snaps his tether, and free at last rushes from the stalls and gains the open plain, he either darts towards the pastures of the herded mares, or bathing, as is his wont, in the familiar river waters, dashes out, and neighs with neck stretched high, glorying, and his mane tosses over collar and shoulder. Camilla with her Volscian array meets him face to face in the gateway; the princess leaps from her horse, and all her squadron at her example slide from horseback to the ground. Then she speaks thus: 'Turnus, if bravery hath any just self–confidence, I dare and promise to engage Aeneas' cavalry, and advance to meet the Tyrrhene horse. Permit my hand to try war's first perils; do thou on foot keep by the walls and guard the city.' To this Turnus, with eyes fixed on the terrible maiden: 'O maiden flower of Italy, how may I essay to express, how to prove my gratitude? But now, since that spirit of thine excels all praise, share thou the toil with me. Aeneas, as the report of the scout I sent assures, hath sent on his light armed horse to annoy us and scour the plains. Himself he marches on the city, across the lonely ridge of the mountain steep. I am arranging a stratagem of war in his pathway on the wooded slope, to block a gorge on the high road with armed troops. Do thou receive and join battle with the Tyrrhene cavalry; with thee shall be gallant Messapus, the Latin squadrons, and Tiburtus' division. Do thou likewise assume a captain's charge.' So speaks he, and with like words heartens Messapus and the allied captains to battle, and advances towards the enemy. There is a sweeping curve of glen, made for ambushes and devices of arms. Dark thick foliage hems it in on either hand, and into it a bare footpath leads by a narrow gorge and difficult entrance. Right above it on the watch–towers of the hill–top lies an unexpected level, hidden away in shelter, whether one would charge from right and left, or stand on the ridge and roll down heavy stones. Hither he passes by a line of way he knew, and seizing his ground occupies the treacherous woods. Meanwhile in the heavenly dwellings Latona's daughter addressed fleet Opis, one of her maiden fellowship and sacred band, and sadly uttered these accents: 'Camilla moves to fierce war, O maiden, and vainly girds on our arms, dear as she is beyond others to me. For her love of Diana is not newly born, nor her spirit stirred by sudden affection. Driven from his kingdom through jealousy of his haughty power, Metabus left ancient Privernum town, and bore his infant with him in his flight through war and battle, the companion of his exile, and called her by her mother Casmilla's name, with a little change, Camilla. Carrying her before him on his breast, he sought a long ridge of lonely woodland; on all sides angry weapons pressed on him, and Volscian soldiery spread hurrying round about. Lo, in mid–flight swollen Amasenus ran foaming with banks abrim, so heavily had the clouds burst in rain. He would swim it, but love of the infant holds him back in alarm for so dear a burden. Inly revolving all, he settled reluctantly on a sudden resolve: the great spear that the warrior haply carried in his stout hand, of hard–knotted and seasoned oak, to it he ties his daughter swathed in cork–tree bark of the woodland, and binds her balanced round the middle of the spear; poising it in his great right hand, he thus cries aloft: 'Gracious one, haunter of the woodland, maiden daughter of Latona, a father devotes this babe to thy service. Thine is this weapon she holds, thine infant suppliant, flying through the air from her enemies. Accept her, I implore, O goddess, for thine own, whom now I entrust to the chance of air.' He spoke, and drawing back his arm, darts the spinning spear shaft. The waters roar; over the racing river poor Camilla shoots on the whistling weapon. But Metabus, as a strong band now presses nigher, plunges into the river, and triumphantly pulls spear and girl, his gift to Trivia, from the grassy turf. No cities ever received him within house or rampart, nor had his savagery submitted to it. He led his life on the lonely pastoral hills. Here he nursed his daughter in the underwood among tangled coverts, on the milk of a wild brood–mare's teats, squeezing the udder into her tender lips. And so soon as the baby stood and went straight on her feet, he armed her hands with a sharp javelin, and hung quiver and bow from her little shoulders. Instead of gold to clasp her tresses, instead of the long skirted gown, a tiger's spoils hang down her back. Even then her tender hand hurled childish darts, and whirled about her head the twisted thong of her sling, and struck down the crane from Stirmund, or the milk white swan. Many a mother among Tyrrhenian towns destined her for their sons in vain. Content with Diana alone, she keeps unsoiled for ever the love of her darts and maidenhood. Would she had not plunged thus into warfare and provoked the Trojans by attack. So were she now dear to me and one of my company. But since bitter doom is upon her, up, glide from heaven, O nymph, and seek the Latin borders, where under evil omen they join in baleful battle. Take these, and draw from the quiver an avenging shaft; by it shall he pay me forfeit of his blood, whoso, Trojan or Italian alike, shall sully her sacred body with a wound. Thereafter will I in a sheltering cloud bear body and armour of the hapless girl unspoiled to the tomb, and lay them in her native land." She spoke, but the other sped lightly down the airy sky, girt about with dark whirlwind on her echoing way. But meanwhile the Trojan force nears the walls, with the Etruscan captains and their whole cavalry arrayed in ordered squadrons. Their horses' trampling hoofs thunder on all the field, as swerving this way and that they chafe at the rain's pressure. The iron field bristles wide with spears, and the plain is aflame with uplifted arms. Likewise Messapus and the Latin horse, and Corus and his brother, and maiden Camilla's squadron come forth against them on the plain, and draw back their hands and level the flickering points of their long lances, in a fire of neighing horses and advancing men. And now each had drawn within javelin cast of each, and drew up. With a sudden shout they dart forth, and urge on their furious horses. From all sides at once weapons shower thick like snow, and veil the sky with their shadow. In a moment Tyrrhenus and fiery Aconteus charge violently with crossing spears, and are the first to fall. They go down with a heavy crash, and their beasts break and shatter chest upon chest. Aconteus, hurled off like a thunderbolt or some mass slung from an engine, is dashed away, and scatters his life in air. Immediately the lines waver, and the Latins wheeling about throw their shields behind them and turn their horses towards the town. The Trojans pursue. Asylas heads and leads on their squadrons. And now they drew nigh the gates, and again the Latins raise a shout and wheel their supple necks about. The pursuers fly and gallop right back with loosened rein, as when the sea, running up in ebb and flow, now rushes shoreward and strikes over the cliffs in a wave of foam, drenching the edge of the sand in its curving sweep; now runs swirling back, and the surge sucks the rolling stones away. Twice the Tuscans turn and drive the Rutulians toward the town; twice they are repelled, and look back behind them from cover of their shields. But when now meeting in a third encounter the lines are locked together all their length, and man singles out his man, then indeed amid groans of the dying, deep in blood roll armour and bodies, and horses half slain mixed up with slaughtered men. The battle swells fierce. Orsilochus hurled his spear at the horse of Remulus, who himself he shrank to meet, and left the steel in it under the ear. At the stroke the charger rears madly, and mastered by the wound, lifts his chest and flings up his legs; the rider is thrown and rolls over on the ground. Catillus strikes down Iollas, and Herminius, mighty in courage, mighty in limbs and arms, bareheaded, tawny haired, bare shouldered, undismayed by wounds, he leaves his vast body open against arms. Through his broad shoulders the quivering spear runs piercing him through, and doubles him up with pain. Everywhere the dark blood flows; they deal death with the sword in battle, and seek a noble death by wounds. But amid the slaughter Camilla rages, a quivered Amazon, with one side stripped for battle, and now sends tough javelins showering from her hand, now snatches the strong battle axe in her unwearying grasp; the golden bow, the armour of Diana, clashes on her shoulders; and even when forced backward in retreat she turns in flight and aims darts from her bow. But around her are her chosen comrades, maiden Larina, Tulla, Tarpeia, brandishing an axe inlaid with bronze, girls of Italy, whom Camilla the bright chose for her own escort, good at service in peace and war, even as Thracian Amazons when the streams of Thermodon clash beneath them as they go to war in painted arms, whether around Hippolyte, or while martial Penthesilea returns in her chariot, and the crescent shielded columns of women dance with loud confused cry. Whom first, whom last, fierce maiden, does thy dart strike down? First Aeneas, son of Clytius, for as he meets her, the long fir shaft crashes through his open breast. He falls, spouting streams of blood, and bites the gory ground, and dying writhes himself upon his wound. Then Liris and Pagasus above him, who fall headlong in together, the one thrown as he reins up his horse, stabbed under him; the other while he runs forward and stretches his unarmed hand to stay his fall. To these she joins Amastrus, son of Hippotas, and follows from far with her spear Tereus and Harpalycus and Demophoon and Chromis; and as many darts as the maiden sends whirling from her hand, so many Phrygians fall. Ornytus the hunter rides near in strange arms on his Iapygian horse, his broad warrior's shoulders swathed in the hide stripped from a bullock, his head covered by a wolf's wide grinning mouth and white tusked jaws; a rustic pike arms his hand; himself he moves amid the squadrons a full head over all. Catching him up, for that was easy amid the rout, she runs him through, and thus cries above her enemy: 'Thou wert hunting wild beasts in the forest, thoughtest thou, Tyrrhenian? The day is come for a woman's arms to refute thy words. Yet no light fame shalt thou carry to thy father's ghost, to have fallen under the weapon of Camilla.' Next Orsilochus and Butes, the two mightiest of mould among the Teucrians. Butes she pierces in the back with her spear point between corslet and helmet, where the neck shews as he sits, and the shield hangs from his left shoulder. Orsilochus she flies, and darting in a wide circle slips into the inner ring and pursues her pursuer; then rising her full height she drives the strong axe deep through the armour and bone; as he pleads and makes much entreaty, warm brain from the wound splashes his face. One met her thus, and hung startled by the sudden sight, the warrior son of Aeneas, haunter of the Apennine, not the meanest in Liguria, while fate allowed him to deceive. And he, when he discerns that no fleetness of foot may now save him from battle or turn the princess from pursuit, essays to wind a subtle device of treachery, and thus begins: 'How hast thou glory, if a woman trust in her horse's strength? Debar, retreat, trust thyself to level ground at close quarters with me, and prepare to fight on foot. Soon wilt thou know how windy boasting brings one to harm.' He spoke, but she, furious and stung with fiery indignation, hands her horse to an attendant, and takes her stand in equal arms, on foot and undismayed, with naked sword and shield unemblazoned. But he, thinking his craft had won the day, himself flies off on the instant, and turning his rein darts off in flight, pricking his beast to speed with iron-armed heel. False Ligurian, in vain elated in thy pride, for naught hast thou attempted thy slippery native arts, nor will thy craft bring thee home unhurt to treacherous Aeneas." So speaks the maiden, and with running feet swift as fire crosses his horse, and catching the bridle meets him in front and takes her vengeance in her enemy's blood. As lightly as the falcon, bird of bale, swoops down from aloft on a pigeon high in a cloud, and pounces on and holds her, and disembowels her with taloned feet, while blood and torn feathers flutter down the sky. But the creator of men and gods sits high on Olympus' summit watching this, not with eyes unseeing; he kindles Tyrrhenian Tarchon to the fierce battle, and sharply goads him on to wrath. So Tarchon gallops amid the slaughter where his squadrons retreat, and urges his troops in changing tones, calling man on man by name, and rallies the flyers to fight. What terror, what utter cowardice hath fallen on your spirits, O never to be stung to shame, O slack alway? A woman drives you in disorder and routs our ranks. Why wear we steel? For what are these idle weapons in our hands? Yet not slack in Venus' service in wars by night, or when the curving flute proclaims Bacchus' revels. To look forward to the feast and the cups on the loaded board, this your passion, this your desire; till the soothsayer pronounce the offering favourable, and the fatted victim invite you to the deep groves." So speaking, he spurs his horse into the midmost, ready himself to die, and bears violently down full on Venulus, and tearing him from horseback, grasps his enemy and carries him away with him on the saddle bow by main force. A cry rises up, and all the Latins turn their eyes. Tarchon flies like fire over the plain, carrying the armed man, and breaks off the steel head from his own spear and searches the uncovered places, trying where he may deal the mortal blow. The other struggling against him keeps his hand off his throat, and strongly parries his attack. And as when a golden eagle snatches and soars with a serpent in its clutch, and his feet are fast in it, and his talons cling, but the wounded snake writhes in coiling spires, and its scales rise and roughen, and its mouth hisses as it towers upward, the bird none the less attacks his struggling prize with crooked beak, while his vans beat the air; even so Tarchon carries Tiburtus out of the ranks, triumphant in his prize. Following their captain's example and issue the men of Maeonia charge in. Then Aruns, due to his doom, circles in advance of fleet Camilla with artful javelin, and tries how fortune may be easiest. Where the maiden darts furious amid the ranks, there Aruns slips up and silently tracks her footsteps. Where she returns victorious and retires from amid the enemy, there he stealthily bends his rapid reins. Here he approaches, and here again he approaches, and strays all round and about, and untiringly shakes his certain spear. Haply Clorius, sacred to Cybele and once her priest, glittered afar, splendid in Phrygian armour; a skin feathered with brazen scales and clasped with gold clothed the horse that foamed under his spur; himself he shone in foreign blue and scarlet, with fleet Gortynian shafts and a Lycian horn; a golden bow was on his shoulder, and the soothsayer's helmet was of gold; red gold knotted up his yellow scarf with its rustling lawny folds; his tunics and barbarian trousers were wrought in needlework. Him, whether that she might nail armour of Troy on her temples, or herself move in captive gold, the maiden pursued in blind chase alone of all the battle conflict, and down the whole line, reckless and fired by a woman's passion for spoils and plunder; when at last out of his ambush Aruns chooses his time and darts his javelin, praying thus aloud to the heaven: 'Apollo, most high of gods, holy Soracte's warder, to whom we beyond all do worship, for whom the blaze of the pinewood heap is fed, where we thy worshippers in pious faith print our steps amid the deep embers of the fire, grant, O Lord omnipotent, that our arms wipe off this disgrace. I seek not the dress the maiden wore, nor trophy or any spoil of victory; other deeds shall bring me praise; let but this dread scourge fall stricken beneath my wound, I will return inglorious to my native towns.' Phoebus heard, and inly granted half his vow to prosper, half he shred into the flying breezes. To surprise and strike down Camilla in sudden death, this he yielded to his prayer; that his high home might see his return he gave not, and a gust swept off his accents on the gale. So when the spear sped from his hand, hurtled through the air, all the Volscians marked it well and turned their eyes on the queen, and she alone knew not wind or sound of the weapon on its airy path, till the spear passed home and sank where her breast met it, and driven deep drank her maiden blood. Her companions ran hastily up and catch their sinking mistress. Aruns takes to flight more alarmed than all, in mingled fear and exultation, and no longer dares to trust his spear or face the maiden's weapons. And as the wolf, some shepherd or great bullock slain, plunges at once among the trackless mountain heights ere hostile darts are in pursuit, and knows even so does Aruns withdraw from sight in dismay, and satisfied to escape mingles in the throng of arms. The dying woman pulls at the weapon with her hand, but the iron head is fixed deep in the wound up between the rib bones. She swoons away with loss of blood, chilling in death her eyes swoon away, the once lustrous colour leaves her face. Then gasping she thus accosts Acca, one of her birthmates, who alone before all was true to Camilla, with whom her cares were divided; and even so she speaks: 'Thus far, Acca my sister, have I availed; now the bitter wound overmasters me, and all about me darkens in haze. Haste away, and carry to Turnus my last message, to take my place in battle, and repel the Trojans from the town. And now good bye.' Even with the words she dropped the reins and slid to the ground unconscious. Then the unnerving chill overspread her, her neck slackened, her head sank overpowered by death, and her arms fell, and with a moan the life fled indignant into the dark. Then indeed an infinite cry rises and smites the golden stars; the battle grows bloodier now Camilla is down. At once in serried ranks all the Teucrian forces pour in, with the Tyrrhene captains and Evander's Arcadian squadrons. But Opis, Trivia's sentinel, long ere now sits high on the hill tops, gazing on the battle undismayed. And when afar amid the din of angry men she espied Camilla done woefully to death, she sighed and uttered forth a deep cry: Ah, too cruel, O maiden, the forfeit thou hast paid for daring armed attack on the Teucrians! And nothing hath availed thee thy lonely following of Diana in the woodlands, nor wearing our quiver on thy shoulder. Yet thy queen hath not left thee unhonored now thy latter end is come, nor will this thy death be unnamed among the nations, nor shalt thou bear the fame of one unavenged, for whosoever hath sullied thy body with a wound shall pay death for due. Under the mountain height was a great earthen mound, tomb of Turnus, a Laurentine king of old, shrouded in shadowy ilex. Hither the goddess most beautiful first swoops down and marks Aruns from the mounded height. As she saw him glittering in arms and idly exultant, "Why," she cries, "wanderest thou away? Hitherward direct thy steps, come hither to thy doom to receive thy fit reward for Camilla. Shalt thou die and buy Diana's weapons?" The Thracian spoke, and slid out a fleet arrow from her gilded quiver, and stretched it level on the bow, and drew it far, till the curving tips met one another; and now her hands touched in counterpoise, the left the steel edge, the string in the right her breast. At once and in a moment Aruns heard the whistle of the dart and the resounding air, as the steel sank in his body. His comrades leave him forgotten on the unknown dust of the plain, moaning his last and gasping his life away. Opis wings her flight to the skyey heaven. At once the light squadron of Camilla retreat, now they have lost their mistress. The Rutulians retreat in confusion, brave Atinas retreats. Scattered captains in thin companies make for safety, and turn their horses backward to the town. Nor does any avail to make stand against the swarming death-dealing Teucrians, or bear their shock in arms; but their unstrung bows droop on their shoulders, and the four-footed galloping horse hoof shakes the crumbling plain. The eddying dust rolls up thick and black towards the walls, and on the watch–towers mothers beat their breasts and the cries of women rise up to heaven. On such as first in the rout broke in at the open gates the mingling hostile throng follows hard. Nor do they escape death, alas, but in the very gateway, within their native city and amid their sheltering homes, they are pierced through and gasp out their life. Some shut the gates and dare not open to their pleading comrades nor receive them in the town, and a most pitiful slaughter begins between armed men who guard the entry and others who rush upon their arms. Barred out before their weeping parents' eyes and faces, some, swept on by the rout, roll headlong into the trenches; some, blindly rushing with loosened rein, batter at the gates and stiffly bolted doorway. The very mothers from the walls in eager heat (true love of country points the way when they see Camilla) dart weapons with shaking hand, and eagerly make hard stocks of wood and fire–hardened poles serve for steel, and burn to die among the foremost for their city's sake. Meanwhile among the forests the terrible news pours in on Turnus, and Acca brings him news of the mighty invasion. The Volscian lines are destroyed, Camilla is fallen, the enemy thicken and press on, and have swept all before them down the tide of battle. Raging he leaves the hills he had beset, Jove's stern will ordains it so, and quits the rough woodland. Scarcely had he marched out of sight and gained the plain when the lord Aeneas enters the open defiles, surmounts the ridge, and issues from the dim forest. So both advanced swiftly to the town with all their columns, no long marching apart, and at once Aeneas descried afar the plains all smoking with dust, and saw the Laurentine columns, and Turnus knew Aeneas terrible in arms, and heard the advancing feet and the neighing of the horses. And straightway would they join battle and essay the conflict, but that ruddy Phoebus even now dips his weary coursers in the Iberian flood, and night draws on over the fading day. They encamp before the city, and draw their trenches round the walls. End of Section 22.
Section 23 of the Aeneid. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, go to LibriVox.org. The Aeneid by Virgil, translated by J.W. McCall. Book 12th, The Slaying of Turnus, Part 1. When Turnus sees the Latins broken and fainting in the thwart issue of war, his promise claimed for fulfilment, and men's eyes pointed on him, his own spirit rises in unappeasable flame. as the lion in Phoenician fields, his breast heavily wounded by the huntsman, at last starts into arms and shakes out the shaggy masses from his exultant neck, and undismayed snaps the brigand's planted weapon, roaring with blood-stained mouth. Even so Turnus kindles and swells in passion. Then he thus addresses the king, and so furiously begins. Turnus stops not the way. There is no excuse for the coward Aeneadae to take back their words or renounce their compact. I join battle. Bring the holy things, my lord, and swear the treaty. Either this hand shall hurl to hell the Dardanian who skulks from Asia, and the Latins sit and see my single sword wipe out the nation's reproach, or let him rule his conquest, and Lavinia pass to his espousal. To him Latinus calmly replied: O excellent young man, the more thy hot valour abounds, the more intently must I counsel and weigh fearfully what may befall. Thou hast thy father Daunus' realm, hast many towns taken by thine hand, nor is Latinus lacking in gold and goodwill. There are other maidens unwedded in Latium and Laurentine fields, and of no mean birth. Let me unfold this hard saying in all sincerity, and do thou drink it into thy soul. I might not ally my daughter to any of her old wooers, such was the universal oracle of gods and men. Overborne by love for thee, overborne by kinship of blood and my weeping wife's complaint, I broke all fetters, I severed the maiden from her promised husband, I took up unrighteous arms. Since then, Turnus, thou seest what calamities, what wars pursue me, what woes thyself before all dost suffer. Twice vanquished in pitched battle, we scarce guard in our city walls the hopes of Italy. The streams of Tiber yet run warm with our blood, and our bones whiten the boundless plain. Why fall I away again and again? What madness bends my purpose? If I am ready to take them into alliance after Turnus' destruction, why do I not rather bar the strife while he lives? What will thy Rutulian kinsmen, will all Italy say, if thy death (fortune make void the word) comes by my betrayal, while thou suest for our daughter in marriage? Cast a glance on war's changing fortune. Pity thine aged father, who now far away sits sad in his native Ardea. In no wise do the words bend Turnus' passion. He rages the more fiercely, and sickens of the cure. So soon as he found speech, he thus made utterance: The care thou hast for me, most gracious lord, for me lay down, I implore thee, and let me purchase honour with death. Our hand too rains weapons, our steel is strong, our wounds too draw blood. The goddess his mother will be far from him to cover his flight, womanlike, in a cloud and an empty phantom's hiding. But the queen, dismayed at the new terms of battle, wept and clung to her fiery son as one ready to die. Turnus, by these tears, by Amata's regard, if that touches thee at all, thou art now the one hope, the repose of mine unhappy age. In thine hand is Latinus' honour and empire. On thee is the weight of all our sinking house. One thing I beseech thee, forbear to join battle with the Teucrians. What fate soever awaits thee in the strife thou seekest, it awaits me, Turnus, too. With thee will I leave the hateful light, nor shall my captive eyes see Aeneas my daughter's lord. Lavinia tearfully heard her mother's words, with cheeks all aflame, as deep blushes set her face on fire and ran hotly over it, even as Indian ivory, if one stain it with sanguine dye, or where white lilies are red with many a rose amid. Such colour came on the maiden's face. Love throws him into tumult, and stays his countenance on the girl. He burns fiercer for arms, and briefly answers Amata: Do not, I pray thee, do not weep for me, neither pursue me thus ominously as I go to the stern shock of war. Turnus is not free to dally with death. Thou, Idmon, bear my message to the Phrygian monarch in this harsh wording. So soon as tomorrow's dawn rises in the sky, blushing in her crimson wheels, let him not lose Teucrian or Rutulian. Let Teucrian and Rutulian arms have rest, and our blood decide the war. On that field let Lavinia be sought in marriage. These words uttered, withdrawing swiftly homeward, he orders out his horses, and rejoicingly beholds them snorting before his face. Those with Orithia's self gave to grace Pilumnus, such as would excel the snows in whiteness and the gales in speed. The eager charioteers stand round and pat their chests with clapping hollowed hands, and comb their tressed manes. Himself next he girds on his shoulders the corslet stiff with gold and pale mountain bronze, and buckles on the sword and shield and scarlet-plumed helmet spikes. That sword the divine lord of fire had himself forged for his father Daunus, and dipped glowing in the Stygian wave. Next, where it stood amid his dwelling, leaning on a massy pillar, he strongly seizes his stout spear, the spoil of Actor the Auruncan, and brandishes it quivering, and cries aloud: "Now, O spear, that never hast failed at my call, now the time is come. Thee princely Actor once, thee Turnus now wields in his grasp. Grant this strong hand to strike down the effeminate Phrygian, to rend and shatter the corslet, and defile in dust the locks curled with hot iron and wet with myrrh." Thus madly he runs on. Sparkles leap out from his blazing face, and his keen eyes flash fire, even as the bull when before his first fight he bellows awfully, and drives against a tree's trunk to make trial of his angry horns, and buffets the air with blows, or scatters the sand in prelude of battle. And therewithal Aeneas, terrible in his mother's armour, kindles for warfare and awakes into wrath, rejoicing that offer of treaty stays the war. Comforting his comrades and sorrowing Iülus' fear, he instructs them of destiny, and bids bear answer of assurance of King Latinus, and name the laws of peace. Scarcely did the morrow shed on the mountain tops the beams of risen day, as the horses of the sun begin to rise from the deep flood, and breathe light from their lifted nostrils. Rutulian and Teucrian men measured out and made ready a field of battle under the great city's ramparts, and midway in it hearth fires and grassy altars to the gods of both peoples, while others bore spring water and fire, draped in priestly dress and their brows bound with grass of the field. The Ausonian army issue forth, and crowd through the gates in streaming serried columns. On this side all the Trojan and Tyrrhenian host pour in diverse armament, girt with iron, even as though the harsh battle strife called them forth. Therewith amid their thousands the captains dart up and down, splendid in gold and purple: Mnestheus, seed of Assaracus, and brave Asylas, and Messapus, tamer of horses, brood of Neptune. Then each on signal given retired to his own ground. They plant their spears in the earth and lean their shields against them, mothers in eager abandonment. And the unarmed crowd and the feeble elders beset towers and house roofs, or stand at the lofty gates. But Juno on the summit that is now called the Alban, then the mountain had neither name nor fame or honour, looked forth from the hill and surveyed the plain and double lines of Laurentine and Trojan and Latinus' town. Straightway spoke she thus to Turnus' sister, goddess to goddess, lady of pools and noisy rivers. Such worship did Jupiter the high king of air consecrate to her for her stolen virginity. Nymph, grace of rivers, best beloved of our soul, thou knowest how out of all Latin women that ever rose of high-hearted Jove's thankless bed, thee only have I preferred, and gladly given part and place in heaven. Learn thy woe, that thou blame not me for it, Juturna. Where fortune seemed to allow, and the destinies granted Latinus' estate to prosper, I shielded Turnus and thy city. Now I see him joining battle with unequal fates, and the day of doom and deadly force draws nigh. Mine eyes cannot look on this battle and treaty. Thou, if thou darest aught of more present help for the brother of thy blood, go on. It befits thee. Haply relief shall follow misery. Scarcely thus, when Juturna's eyes overbrimmed with tears, and thrice and again she smote her hand on her gracious breast. This is not time for tears, cries Juno, daughter of Saturn. Hasten and snatch thy brother, if it may be, from his death, or do thou waken war, and make the treaty abortive. I encourage thee to dare. With such urgence she left her, doubting and dismayed, and grievously wounded in soul. Meanwhile the kings go forth. Latinus in mighty pomp rides on his 4-horse chariot. 12 gilded rays go glittering round his brows, symbol of the sun his ancestor. Turnus moves behind a white pair, clenching in his hand 2 broad-headed spears. On this side Lord Aeneas, fount of the Roman face, ablaze in star-like shield and celestial arms, and close by Ascanius, second hope of mighty Rome, issue from the camp. And the priest in spotless raiment hath brought the young of a bristly sow and an unshorn sheep of 2 years old, and set his beasts by the blazing altars. They, turning their eyes towards the sun rising, scatter salted corn from their hands, and clip the beasts with steel over the temples, and pour cups on the altars. Then Aeneas the good, with sword drawn, thus makes invocation: Be the sun now witness, and this earth to my call, for whose sake I have borne to suffer so sore travail, and the Lord omnipotent, and thou his wife at last, divine daughter of Saturn, at last I pray more favourable, and thou mighty Mavers, who wieldest all warfare in lordship beneath thy sway, and on the springs and rivers I call, and the dread of high heaven, and the divinities of the blue seas. If haply victory fall to Turnus the Ausonian, the vanquished make covenant to withdraw to Evander's city. Iülus shall quit the spoil, nor ever hereafter shall the Aeneadae return in arms to renew warfare, or attack this realm with the sword. But if victory grant battle to us and ours, as I think the rather, and so the rather may the gods seal their will, I will not bid Italy obey my Teucrians, nor do I claim the realm for mine. Let both nations, unconquered, join treaty for ever under equal law. Gods and worship shall be of my giving. My father Latinus shall bear the sword, and have a father's prescribed command. For me my Teucrians shall establish a city, and Lavinia give the town her name. Thus Aeneas first. Thereon Latinus thus follows: By these same I swear, O Aeneas, by earth, sea, sky, and the twin brood of Latona and Janus the double-facing, and the might of nether gods and grim Pluto's shrine, thus let our father hear, who seals treaties with his thunderbolt. I touch the altars, I take to witness the fires and the gods between us. No time shall break this peace and truce in Italy, howsoever fortune fall, nor shall my force turn my will aside, not if it dissolve land into water in turmoil of deluge, or melt heaven in hell. So surely as this sceptre, for haply he bore a sceptre in his hand, shall never burgeon into thin leafage and shady shoot, since once in the forest cut down right of the stem it lost its mother, and the steel lopped away its tressed arms. A tree of old, now the craftsman's hand hath bound it in adornment of brass, and given it to our Latin fathers bearing. With such words they sealed mutual treaty midway in sight of the princes. Then they duly slay the consecrated beasts over the flames, and tear out their live entrails, and pile the altars with laden chargers. But long ere this the Rutulians deemed the battle unequal, and their hearts are stirred in changeful motion. And now the more, as they discern nigher that an ill-matched strength, heightened by Turnus, as advancing with noiseless pace he humbly worships at the altar with downcast eyes, by his wasted cheeks and the pallor on his youthful frame. Soon as Juturna his sister saw this talk spread, and the people's mind waver in uncertainty, into the mid-ranks, in feigned form of Commertus, his family was high in long ancestry, and his father's name for valour renowned, and himself most valiant in arms, into the mid-rank she glides, not ignorant of her task, and scatters diverse rumours, saying thus: Shame, O Rutulians! Shall we set one life in the breach for so many such as these? Are we unequal in numbers of bravery? See, Troy and Arcadia is all they bring, and those fate-bound bands that Etruria hurls on Turnus. Scarce is there an enemy to meet every other man of ours. He indeed will ascend to the gods, for those altars he devotes himself, and move living in the lips of men. We, our country lost, shall bow to the haughty rigour of our lords, if we now sit slackly in the field. By such words the soldiers' counsel was kindled yet higher and higher, and a murmur crept through their columns. The very Laurentine, the very Latins are changed. And they who but now hoped for rest from battle and rescue of fortune, now desire arms, and pray the treaty were undone, and pity Turnus' cruel lot. To this Juturna adds a yet stronger impulse, and high in heaven shows a sign more potent than any to confuse Italian souls with delusive augury. For in the crimson sky Jove's tawny bird flew chasing, in a screaming crowd, fowl of the shore that winged their column, then suddenly stooping to the water, pounces on a noble swan with merciless crooked talons. The startled Italians watch, with all the birds together clamorously wheel round from flight wonderful to see, and dim the sky with their pinions, and in thickening cloud urge their foe through air, till conquered by their attack and his heavy prey, he yielded and dropped it from his talons into the river, and winged his way deep into the clouds. Then indeed the Rutulians clamorously greet the omen, and their hands flash out, and Tolumnius the augur cries before them all, "This it was, this that my vows often have sought. I welcome and know a deity. Follow me, follow, snatch up the sword, O hapless people whom the greedy alien frightens with his arms like silly birds, and with strong hand ravages your shores. He too will take to flight and spread his sails afar over ocean. Do you with one heart close up your squadrons, and defend in battle your lost king." He spoke, and darting forward hurled a weapon full on the enemy. The whistling corn shaft sings, and unerringly cleaves the air. At once and with a vast shout goes up, and all their rows are amazed, and their hearts hotly stirred. The spear flies on, where haply stood opposite in ninefold brotherhood all the beautiful sons of one faithful Tyrrhene wife, born to her by Gylippus the Arcadian. One of them midway, where the sewn belt rubs on the flank of the clasp, bites the fastenings of the side. One of them, excellent in beauty and glittering in arms, it pierces clean through the ribs and stretches on the yellow sand. But of this banded brethren, their courage fired by grief, some grasp and draw their swords, some snatch weapons to throw and rush blindly forward. The Laurentine columns rush forth against them. Again from the other side Trojans and Agylians and Arcadians in painted armour flood thickly in. So hath one passion seized all to make decision by the sword. They pull the altars to pieces. Through all the air goes a thick storm of weapons, and faster falls the iron rain. Bowls and hearth fires are carried off. Latinus himself retreats, bearing the outraged gods of the broken treaty. The others harness their chariots or vault upon their horses and come up with swords drawn. Messapus, eager to shatter the treaty, rides menacingly down to Alestes the Tyrrhenian, a king in a king's array. Retreating hastily, and tripped on the altars that meet him behind, the hapless man goes down on his head and shoulders. But Messapus flies up with wrathful spear, and strikes him as he pleads sore, a deep downward blow from horseback with his beam-like spear, saying thus, "That for him! The high gods take his better victim." The Italians crowd in and strip his warm limbs. Corynaeus seizes a charred brand from the altar, and meeting Ebysus as he advances to strike, darts the flame in his face. His heavy beard flamed up and gave out a scorched smell. Following up his enemy's confusion, the other seizes him with his left hand by the air, and bears him to earth with a thrust of his planted knee, and there drives the unyielding sword into his side. Podalirius pursues and overhangs with naked sword the shepherd Alsus, as he rushes amid the foremost line of weapons. Alsus swings back his axe and severs brow and chin full in front, wetting his armour all over with spattered blood. Grim rest and iron slumber seal his eyes. His lids close on everlasting night. But Aeneas, his head bared, kept stretching his unarmed hand and calling loudly to his men. "Whither run you? What is this strife that so spreads and swells? Ah, restrain your wrath. Truce is already stricken, and all its laws ordained. Mine alone is the right of battle. Leave me alone, and my hand shall confirm the treaty. These rights already make Turnus mine. Amid these accents, amid words like these, lo, a whistling arrow winged its way to him, sped from what hand or driven by what god none knows, or what chance or deity brought such honour to the Rutulians. The renown of the high deed was buried, nor did any boast to have dealt Aeneas' wound. Turnus, when he saw Aeneas retreating from the ranks and his captains in dismay, burns hot with sudden hope. At once he calls for his horses and armour, and with a bound leaps proudly into his chariot and handles the reins. He darts on, dealing many a brave man's body to death. Many a one he rolls half slain, or crushes whole files under his chariot, or seizes and showers spears on the fugitives. As when by the streams of icy Hebrus Mavers kindles to bloodshed, and clashes on his shield, and stirs war, and speeds his furious coursers. They outwing south winds and west on the open plain. Utmost Thrace groans under their hoof-beats, and around in the gods' train rush the faces of dark terror, and wraths, and ambushes. Even so amid the battle Turnus briskly lashes on his reeking horses, trampling on the foes that lie piteously slain. The galloping hoof scatters bloody dew, and spurns mingled gore and sand. And now hath he dealt Sthenelus to death, and Thamyris, and Pholus, him at close quarters, the other from afar both the sons of Imbrasus, Glaucus, and Lades, whom Imbrasus himself had nurtured in Lycia and equipped in equal arms, whether to meet hand to hand or to outstrip the winds on horseback. Elsewhere Eumedes advances amid the fray, ancient Dolon's brood, illustrious in war, renewing his father's name, his father's courage and strength of hand, who of old dared to claim Pelides' chariot as his price if he went to spy out the Grecian camp. To him the son of Tydeus told out another price for his venture, and he dreams no more of Achilles' horses. Him Turnus descried far on the open plain, and first following him with light javelin through the long space of air, stops his double-harnessed horses, and leaps from the chariot, and descends on his fallen half-lifeless foe, and planting his foot on his neck, wrests the blade out of his hand, and dyes its glitter deep in his throat, adding these words withal: Behold, thou liest, Trojan, meting out those Hesperian fields thou didst seek in war. Such guerdon is theirs who dare to tempt my sword. Thus do they found their city. Then with the spear cast he sent as beauties to follow him, and Chlorius and Sybaris, Dares, Thersilochus, and Thymedes, fallen flung over his horse's neck. And as when the Edonian north wind's wrath roars on the deep Aegean, and the wave follows it shoreward, where the blast comes down, the clouds race over the sky, so wherever Turnus cleaves his way, columns retreat and lines turn and run. His own speed bears him on, and his flying plume tosses as his chariot meets the breeze. Phegeus brooked not his proud approach. He faced the chariot, and caught and twisted away in his right hand the mouth of his horses, spurred into speed and foaming on the bit. Dragged along and hanging by the yoke, he is left uncovered. The broad lance-head reaches him, pins and pierces the double-woven breastplate, and lightly wounds the surface of his body. Yet turning, he advances on the enemy behind his shield, and sought succour in the naked point, when the wheel, running forward on its swift axle, struck him headlong and flung him to the ground, and Turnus' sword, following it, smote off his head between the helmet rim and the upper border of the breastplate, and left the body on the sand. And while Turnus thus victoriously deals death over the plains, Mnestheus meantime, and faithful Achates and Ascanius by their side, set down Aeneas in the camp, dabbled with blood and leaning every other step on his long spear. He storms and tries hard to pull out the dart where the reed had broken, and calls for the nearest way of remedy, to cut open the wound with the broad blade, and tear apart the weapon's lurking place, and so send him back to battle. And now Iapix, son of Iasus, came, beloved beyond others of Phoebus, to whom once of old, smitten with sharp desire, Apollo gladly offered his own arts and gifts, augury and the lyre and swift arrows. He, to lengthen out the destiny of a parent given over to die, chose rather to know the potency of herbs and the practice of healing, and deal in a silent art unrenowned. Aeneas stood chafing bitterly, propped on his vast spear, mourning Iülus, and a great crowd of men around, unstirred by their tears. The aged man, with garment drawn back and girt about him in Paeonian fashion, makes many a hurried effort with healing hand and the potent herbs of Phoebus, all in vain. In vain his hand solicits the arrowhead, and his pincer's grasp pulls at the steel. Fortune leads him forward in no wise. Apollo aids not with counsel, and more the fierce clash swells over the plains, and the havoc draws nigher on. Already they see the sky a mass of dust, the cavalry approaching, and shafts falling thickly amid the camp. The dismal cry uprises of warriors fighting and falling under the war god's heavy hand. At this, stirred deep by her son's cruel pain, Venus his mother plucked from Cretan Ida a stalk of dittamy, with downy leaves and bright tressed flowers, the plant not unknown to wild goats when winged arrows are fast in their body. This Venus bore down, her shape girt in a dim halo. This she steeps with secret healing in the river water poured out in sparkling Abram, and sprinkles life-giving juice of ambrosia and scented balm. With that water aged Iapix washed the wound, unwitting, and suddenly, lo, all the pain left his body, all the blood in the deep wound was stanched. And now, following his hand, the arrow fell out with no force, and strength returned afresh as of old. "Hasten, arms for him quickly! Why stand you?" cries Iapix aloud, and begins to kindle their courage against the enemy. "This comes not by human resource or schooling of art, nor does my hand save thee, Aeneas. A higher god is at work, and sends thee back to higher deeds." He, eager for battle, had already clasped on the greaves of gold right and left, and scorning delay brandishes his spear. When the shield is adjusted by his side and the corslet on his back, he clasps Ascanius in his armed embrace, and lightly kissing him through the helmet, cries, "Learn of me, O boy, valour and toil indeed, fortune of others. Now mine hand shall give thee defence in war, and lead thee to great reward. Do thou, when hereafter thine age ripens to fullness, keep this in remembrance, and as thou recallest the pattern of thy kindred, let thy spirit rise by thy father Aeneas, thine uncle Hector." These words uttered, he issued towering from the gates, brandishing his mighty spear. With him in serried column rush Antheus and Mnestheus, and all the throng streams forth of the camp. The field drifts with blinding dust, and the startled earth trembles under the tramp of feet. From the earthworks opposite Turnus saw, and the Ausonians saw them come, and an icy shudder ran deep through their frame. First and before all the Latins, Juturna heard and knew the sound, and in terror fled away. He flies on, and flurries his dark column over the open plain, as when in fierce weather a storm cloud moves over mid-sea to land. With presaging heart, ah me, the hapless husbandmen shudder from afar. It will deal havoc to their trees, and destruction to their crops, and make a broad path of ruin. The winds fly before it, and bear its roar to the breach. So the Rhoetean captain drives his army fully on the foe. One and all they close up in wedges, and mass their serried ranks. Thymbraeus smites massive Osiris with his sword. Mnestheus slays Arcetius, Acades Apullo, Gaius Ufens. Tolumnius the augur himself goes down, he who had hurled the first weapon against the foe. Their cry rises to heaven, and in turn the routed Rutulians give backward in flight over the dusty fields. Himself he deigns not to cut down the fugitives, nor pursue such as meet him fair on foot or approach in arms. Turnus alone he tracks, and searches in the thick haze, alone calls him to conflict. Then panic-stricken the warrior maiden flings Turnus' charioteer out over his reins, and leaving him far where he slips from the chariot pole, herself succeeds and turns the wavy reins, tones and limbs and armour all of Metiscus' wearing. As when the black swallow flits through some rich lord's spacious house, and circles in flight the lofty halls, gathering her tiny food for sustenance to her twittering nestlings, and now swoops down the spacious colonnades, now round the wet ponds. In like wise dart Juturna's horses amid the enemy, and her fleet chariot passes flying over all the field. And now here she displays her triumphant brother, not yet allows him to close, but flies far and away. None the less does Aeneas thread the circling maze to meet him, and tracks his man, and with loud cry cries on him through the scattered ranks. Often as he cast eyes on his enemy, and essayed to outrun the speed of the flying-footed horses, so often Juturna wheeled her team away. Alas, what can he do? Vainly he tosses on the ebb and flow, and in his spirit diverse cares make conflicting call. When Messapus, who haply bore in his left hand 2 tough spear shafts topped with steel, runs lightly up, and aims and hurls one of them upon him with unerring stroke, Aeneas stood still and gathered himself within his armour, sinking on bended knee. Yet the rushing spear bore off his helmet spike, and dashed the helmet plume from the crest. Then indeed his wrath swells, and forced to it by their treachery, while chariot and horses disappear, he calls Jove oft and again to witness and the altars of the violated treaty, and now at last plunges amid their lines. Sweeping terrible down the tide of battle, he awakens fierce indiscriminate carnage, and flings loose all the reins of wrath. End of section 23. Section 24 of the Aeneid. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. The Aeneid by Virgil, translated by J.W. McCall. Book 12th, The Slaying of Turnus, Part 2. What God may now unfold for me in verse, so many woes, so many diverse slaughters, the death of captains, whom now Turnus, now again the Trojan hero, drives over all the field. Was it well, O God, that nations destined to everlasting peace should clash in so vast a shock? Aeneas meets Sucro the Rutulian. The combat stayed the first rush of the Teucrians, but delayed them not long. He catches him on the side, and when fate comes quickest, drives the harsh sword clean through the ribs, where they fenced the breast. Turnus brings down Amycus from horseback with his brother Diores, and meets them on foot. Him he strikes with his long spear as he comes, him with his sword point, and hangs both severed heads on his chariot, and carries them off dripping with blood. The one sends to death Talos and Teneus and brave Sethagus, 3 at one meeting, and gloomy Onides of Echionian name, and Peridia the mother that bore him. The other those brethren sent from Lycia and Apollo's field, and Moniates the Arcadian, him who loathed warfare in vain, who once had his art and humble home about the river fisheries of Lerna, and knew not the courts of the great. But his father was tenant of the land he tilled, and as fires kindled dispersedly in a dry forest and rustling laurel thickets, or foaming rivers where they lap swift and loud from the high hills, and speed to sea each on his own path of havoc, as fiercely the two, Aeneas and Turnus, dash amid the battle. Now wrath surges within them, and unconquerable hearts are torn. Now in all their might they rush upon wounds. The one dashes Murranus down, and stretches him on the soil with a vast whirling mass of rock, as he cries the names of his fathers and forefathers of old, a whole line drawn through the Latin kings. Under traces and yoke the wheels spurned him, and the fast-beating hoofs of his rushing horses trample down their forgotten lord. The other meets Hylas rushing on in gigantic pride, and hurls his weapon at his gold-bound temples. The spear pierced through the helmet and stood fast in the brain. Neither did thy right hand save thee from Turnus, O Cretheus, bravest of the Greeks, nor did his gods shield Cupencus when Aeneas came. He gave his breast full to the steel, nor, alas, was the brazen shield's delay aught of avail. Thee likewise, Aeolus, the Laurentine plains saw sink backward and cover a wide space of earth. Thou fallest, whom Argive battalions could not lay low, nor Achilles the destroyer of Priam's realm. Here was thy goal of death. Thine high house was under Ida, at Lyrnessus thine high house, on Laurentine soil thy tomb. The whole battle lines gather up, all Latium, all Dardania, Menestheus, and the valiant Serestus, with Messapus, tamer of horses, and brave Acillus, the Tuscan battalion, and Evander's Arcadian squadrons. Man by man they struggle with all their might, no rest nor pause in the vast strain of conflict. At this Aeneas' mother, most beautiful, inspired him to advance on the walls, directing his columns on the town and dismaying the Latins with sudden and swift disaster. As in search for Turnus he bent his glance this way and that around the separate ranks, he descries the city free from all this warfare, unpunished and unstirred. Straightway he kindles at the view of a greater battle. He summons Menestheus and Sergestus and brave Serestus, his captains, and mounts a hillock. There the rest of the Teucrian army gathers thickly, still grasping shield and spear. Standing on the high mound amid them, he speaks: "Be there no delay to my words, Jupiter is with us. Neither let any be slower to move, that the design is sudden. This city to-day, the source of war, the royal seat of Latinus, unless they yield them to receive our yoke and obey their conquerors, will I raze to ground, and lay her smoking roofs level with the dust. Must I wait forsooth till Turnus please to stoop to combat, and choose again to face his conqueror? This, O citizens, is the fountainhead and crown of the accursed war. Bring brands speedily, and reclaim the treaty in fire." He ended, all with spirit alike emulous, form a wedge and advance in serried masses to the walls. Ladders are run up, and fire leaps sudden to sight. Some rush to the separate gates and cut down the guards of the entry. Others hurl their steel and darken the sky with weapons. Aeneas himself among the foremost, upstretching his hand to the city walls, loudly reproaches Latinus, and takes the gods to witness that he is again forced into battle, that twice now do the Italians choose warfare and break a second treaty. Discord rises among the alarmed citizens. Some bid unbar the town and fling wide the gates to the Dardanians, and pull the king himself towards the ramparts. Others bring arms and hasten to defend the walls. As when a shepherd tracks bees to their retreat in a recessed rock, and fills it with stinging smoke, they within run uneasily up and down their waxen fortress, and hum louder in rising wrath. The smell rolls in darkness along their dwelling, and a blind murmur echoes within the rock as the smoke issues to the empty air. This fortune likewise befell the despairing Latins. This woe shook the whole city to her base. The queen espies from her roof the enemy's approach, the walls scaled and firebrands flying on the houses, and nowhere Rutulian ranks, none of Turnus' columns to meet them. Alas, she deems him destroyed in the shock of battle, and distracted by sudden anguish, shrieks that she is the source of guilt, the spring of ill, and with many a mad utterance of frenzied grief rends her purple attire with dying hand, and ties from a lofty beam the ghastly noose of death. And when the unhappy Latin women knew this calamity, first her daughter Lavinia tears her flower-like tresses and roseate cheeks, and all the train around her madden in her suit. The wide palace echoes to their wailing, and from it the sorrowful rumour spreads abroad throughout the town. All hearts sink. Latinus goes with torn raiment in dismay at his wife's doom and his city's downfall, defiling his hoary hair with soilure of sprinkled dust. Meanwhile, on the skirts of the field, Turnus chases scattered stragglers, ever slacker to battle, ever less and less exultant in his courser's victorious speed. The confused cry came to him borne in blind terror down the breeze, and his startled ears caught the echoing tumult and disastrous murmur of the town. Ah me, what agony shakes the city, or what is this cry that fleets so loud from the distant town? So speaks he, and distracted checks the reins, and to him his sister, as changed into the charioteer Metiscus' likeness, she swayed horses and chariot reins, thus rejoined: "This way, Turnus, let us pursue the brood of Troy, where victory opens her nearest way. There are others whose hands can protect their dwelling. Aeneas falls fiercer on the Italians and closes on conflict. Let our hand too deal pitiless death on his Teucrians. Neither in tale of dead nor in glory of battle shalt thou retire outdone." Thereat Turnus: "Ah, my sister, long ere now I knew thee, when first thine arts shattered the treaty, and thou didst mingle in the strife, and now thy godhead conceals itself in vain. But who hath bidden thee descend from heaven to bear this sore travail? Was it that thou mightest see thy hapless brother cruelly slain? For what do I, or what fortune yet gives promise of safety? Before my very eyes, calling aloud on me, I saw Murranus, than whom none other is left me more dear, sink huge to earth, borne down by as huge a wound. Hapless Ufens is fallen, not to see our shame. Corpse and armour are in Teucrian hands, and destruction of their households. This was the one thing yet lacking. Shall I suffer it? Shall my hand not refute Drances' jeer? Shall I turn my back, and this land see Turnus a fugitive? Is death all so bitter? Do you, O shades, be gracious to me, since the powers of heaven are estranged. To you shall I go down, a pure spirit, and ignorant of your blame, never once unworthy of my mighty fathers of old." Scarce had he spoken thus, lo, Saces, borne flying on his foaming horse through the thickest of the foe, an arrow wound right in his face, darts, beseeching Turnus by his name: "Turnus, in thee is our last safety. Pity thy people. Aeneas thunders in arms, and threatens to overthrow and hurl to destruction the high Italian fortress, and already firebrands are flying on our roofs. On thee the Latins turn their gazing eyes. King Latinus himself mutters in doubt, whom he is to call his sons, to whom he shall incline in union. Moreover the queen, the surest stay, hath fallen by her own hand, and in dismay fled the light. Alone in front of the gates, Messapus and valiant Atinus sustain the battle line. Round about them to right and left the armies stand locked, and iron field shivers with naked points. Thou wheelest thy chariot in the sward alone." At the distracting picture of his fortune, Turnus froze in horror and stood in dumb gaze. Together in his heart sweep the vast mingling tides of shame and maddened grief, and love stung to frenzy and resolved valour. So soon as the darkness cleared and light returned to his soul, he fiercely turned his blazing eyeballs towards the ramparts, and gazed back from his wheels on the great city. And lo, a spire of flame, wreathing through the floors, wavered up skyward and held a turret fast, a turret that he himself had reared of mortised planks, and set on rollers, and laid with high gangways. Now, O my sister, now fate prevails. Cease to hinder. Let us follow where deity and stern fortune call. I am resolved to face Aeneas, resolved to bear what bitterness there is in death, nor shalt thou longer see me shamed, sister of mine. Let me be mad, I pray thee, with this madness before the end." He spoke, and leapt swiftly from his chariot to the field, and darting through weapons and through enemies, leaves his sorrowing sister, and bursts in rapid course amid their columns. And as when a rock rushes headlong from some mountain peak, torn away by the blast, or if the rushing rain washes it away, or the stealing years loosen its ancient hold, the reckless mountain mass goes sheer and impetuous, and leaps along the ground, hurling with it forests and herds and men. Thus through the scattering columns Turnus rushes to the city walls, where the earth is wettest with bloodshed, and the air sings with spears, and beckons with his hand, and thus begins aloud: "Forbear now, O Rutulians, and you, Latins, stay your weapons. Whatsoever fortune is left is mine. I singly must expiate the treaty for you all, and make decision with the sword." All drew aside and left him room. But lord Aeneas, hearing Turnus' name, abandons the walls, abandons the fortress height, and in exultant joy flings aside all hindrance, breaks off all work, and clashes his armour terribly, vast as Athos or as Eryx, or as the lords of Apennine, when he roars with his tossing ilex woods, and rears his snowy crest rejoicing into air. Now indeed Rutulians and Trojans and all Italy turned in emulous gaze, and they who held the high city, and they whose ram was battering the foundations of the wall, and unarmed their shoulders. Latinus himself stands in amaze at the mighty men, born in distant quarters of the world, met and making decision with the sword. And they in the empty level field that cleared for them darted swiftly forward, and hurling their spears from afar, close in battle shock with clangour of brazen shields. Earth utters a moan, the sword strokes fall thick and fast, chance and valour joining in one. And as in broad Scylla or high in Tiburnus, when two bulls rush to deadly battle forehead to forehead, the herdsmen retire in terror, all the herd stands dumb in dismay, and the heifers murmur in doubt which shall be lord in the woodland, which all the cattle must follow. They violently deal many a mutual wound, and gore with their stubborn horns, bathing their necks and shoulders in abundant blood, and all the woodland moans back their bellowing. Even thus Aeneas of Troy and the Daunian hero rush together shield to shield. The mighty crash fills the sky. Jupiter himself holds up the two scales in even balance, and lays in them the different fates of both, trying which shall pay forfeit of the strife, whose weight shall sink in death. Turnus darts out, thinking it secure, and rises with his whole reach of body in his uplifted sword, then strikes. Trojans and Latins cry out in excitement, and both armies strain their gaze. But the treacherous sword shivers, and in mid-stroke deserts its eager lord. If flight aim him not now, he flies swifter than the wind, when once he descries a strange hilt in his weaponless hand. Rumour is that his headlong hurry, when mounting behind his yoked horses to begin the battle, he left his father's sword behind, and caught up his charioteer Metiscus' weapon. And that served him long, while Teucrian stragglers turned their backs. When it met the divine Vulcanian armour, the mortal blade like brittle ice snapped in the stroke. The shards lie glittering upon the yellow sand. So in distracted flight Turnus darts afar over the plain, and now this way and now that crosses in wavering circles. For on all hands the Teucrians locked him in crowded ring, and the dreary marsh on this side, on this the steep city ramparts hem him in. Therewith Aeneas pursues, though ever and anon his knees, disabled by the arrow, hinder and stay his speed, and foot hard on foot presses hotly on his hurrying enemy, as when a hunter courses with a fleet barking hound some stag caught in a river loop or girt by the crimson feathered toils, and he, in terror of the snares in the high river bank, darts back and forward in 1,000 ways. But the keen Umbrian clings agape, and just catches at him, and as though he caught him, snaps his jaws, while the baffled teeth close on vacancy. Then indeed a cry goes up, and banks and pools answer round and about, and all the sky echoes the din. He, even as he flies, chides all his Rutulians, calling each by name, and shrieks for the sword he knew. But Aeneas denounces death and instant doom if one of them draw nigh, and doubles their terror with threats of the city's destruction, and though wounded presses on. 5 circles they cover at full speed, and unwind as many this way and that. For not light nor slight is the prize they seek, but Turnus' very life-blood is at issue. Here there haply had stood a bitter-leaved wild olive, sacred to Faunus, a tree worshipped by mariners of old. On it, when rescued from the waves, they were wont to fix their gifts to the god of Laurentum, and hang their votive raiment. But the Teucrians, unregarding, had cleared away the sacred stem, that they might meet on unimpeded lists. Here stood Aeneas' spear. Hither borne by its own speed, it was held fast, stuck in the tough root. The Dardanian stooped over it, and would wrench away the steel, to follow with the weapon him whom he could not catch in running. Then indeed Turnus cries in frantic terror, Faunus, have pity, I beseech thee, and thou, most gracious earth, keep thy hold on the steel, as I ever have kept your worship, and the Aeneadae again have polluted it in war. He spoke, and called the god to aid in vows that fell not fruitless. For all Aeneas' strength, his long struggling and delay over the tough stem availed not to unclose the hard grip of the wood. While he strains and pulls hard, the Daunian gods, changing once more into the charioteer Metiscus' likeness, runs forward and passes her brother his sword. But Venus, indignant that the nymph might be so bold, drew nigh and wrenched away the spear where it stuck deep in the root. Erect in fresh courage and arms, he with his faithful sword, he towering fierce over his spear, they face one another panting in the battle shock. Meanwhile the King of Heaven's omnipotence accosts Juno as she gazes on the battle from the sunlit cloud. What yet shall be the end, O wife? What remains at the last? Heaven claims Aeneas as his country's god. Thou thyself knowest and avowest to know, and fate lifts him to the stars. With what device or in what hope hangest thou chill in cloudland? Was it well that a deity should be sullied by a mortal wound, or that the lost sword, for what without thee could Juturna avail, should be restored to Turnus, and swell the force of the vanquished? Forbear now, I pray, and bend to our entreaties. Let not the pain thus devour thee in silence, and distress so often flood back on me from thy sweet lips. The end is come. Thou hast had power to hunt the Trojans over land or wave, to kindle accursed war, to put the house in mourning, and plunge the bridal in grief. Further attempt I forbid thee. Thus Jupiter began, thus the goddess, daughter of Saturn, returned with looks cast down. Even because this thy will, great Jupiter, is known to me for thine, have I left, though loath, Turnus alone on earth. Nor else wouldst thou see me now alone in this skiey seat, enduring good and bad. But girt in flame I were standing by their very lines, and dragging the Teucrians into the deadly battle. I counselled Juturna, I confess it, to succour her hapless brother, and for his life's sake favoured a greater daring. Yet not the arrow shoot, nor the bending of the bow, I swear by the merciless wellhead of the Stygian spring, the single ordained dread of the gods in heaven. And now I retire and leave the battle in loathing. This thing I beseech thee, that is bound by no fatal law, for Latium, and for the majesty of thy kindred. When now they shall plight peace with prosperous marriage, be it so. When now they shall join in laws and treaties, bid thou not the native Latins change their name of old, nor become Trojans and take the Teucrian name, or change their language, or alter their attire. Let Latium be, let Alban kings endure through ages, let Italian valour be potent in the race of Rome. Troy is fallen, let her and her name lie where they fell. To her smiling, the designer of men and things. Jove's own sister thou art, the second seed of Saturn, such surge of wrath tosses within thy breast. But come, allay this madness so vainly stirred. I give thee thy will, and yield thee ungrudged victory. Ausonia shall keep her native speech and usage, and as her name is, it shall be. The Trojans shall sink mingled into their blood. I will add their sacred law and ritual, and make all Latins, and of a single speech. Hence shall spring a race of tempered Ausonian blood, whom thou shalt see outdo men and gods in duty. Nor shall any nation so observe thy worship. To this Juno assented, and in gladness withdrew her purpose. Meanwhile she quits her cloud, and retires out of the sky. This done, the father resolves inly another counsel, and prepares to separate Juturna from her brother's arms. Twin monsters there are, called the Dirae by their name, whom the infernal Megaera, the dead of night, bore at one single birth, and wreathed them in like serpent coils, and clothed them in windy wings. They appear at Jove's throne and in the courts of the grim king, and quicken the terrors of wretched men whensoever the Lord of heaven deals sicknesses and dreadful death, or sends terror or war upon guilty cities. One of these Jupiter sent swiftly down from the heaven's height, and bade her meet Juturna for a sign. She wings her way, and darts in a whirlwind to earth, even as an arrow through a cloud, darting from the string when Parthian hath poisoned it with bitter gall. Parthian or Sidonian, and sped the immedicable shaft, leaps through the swift shadow whistling and unknown. So sprung and swept to earth the daughter of night. When she espies the Ilian ranks and Turnus' columns, suddenly shrinking to the shape of a small bird that often sits late by night on tombs or ruinous roofs, and vexes the darkness with her cry, in such change of likeness the monster shrilly passes and repasses before Turnus' face, and her wings beat restlessly on his shield. A strange numbing terror unnerves his limbs, his hair thrills up, and the accents falter on his tongue. But when his hapless sister knew afar the whistling wings of the Fury, Juturna unbinds and tears her tresses, with rent face and smitten bosom. How, O Turnus, can thine own sister help thee now? Or what more is there if I break not under this? What art of mine can lengthen out thy day? Can I contend with this ominous thing? Now I quit the field. Dismay not my terrors, disastrous birds. I know these beating wings and the sound of death, nor do I miss high-hearted Jove's haughty ordinance. Is this his repayment for my maidenhood? What good is his gift of life for ever? Why have I forfeited a mortal's lot? Now assuredly could I make all this pain cease, and go with my unhappy brother side by side into the dark. Alas mine immortality! Will aught of mine be sweet to me without thee, my brother? Ah, how may earth yawn deep enough for me, and plunge my godhead in the underworld? So spoke she, and wrapping her head in her grey vesture, the goddess, moaning, sore sank in the river depth. But Aeneas presses on, brandishing his vast tree-like spear, and fiercely speaks thus: What more delay is there now? Or why, Turnus, dost thou yet shrink away? Not in speed of foot, in grim arms, hand to hand must be the conflict. Transform thyself as thou wilt, and collect what strength or courage or skill is thine. Pray that thou mayest wing thy flight to the stars on high, or that sheltering earth may shut thee in. The other, shaking his head: Thy fierce words dismay me not, insolent. The gods dismay me in Jupiter's enmity. And no more said, his eyes light on a vast stone, a stone ancient and vast that haply lay upon the plain, set for a landmark to divide contested fields. Scarcely might 12 chosen men lift it on their shoulders, of such frame as now earth brings to birth. Then the hero caught it up with trembling hand and whirled it at the foe, rising higher and quickening his speed. But he knew not his own self running, nor going, nor lifting his hands, or moving the mighty stone. His knees totter, his blood freezes cold. The very stone he hurls, spinning through the empty void, neither wholly reached its distance, nor carried its blow home. And as in sleep, when nightly rest weighs down our languorous eyes, we seem vainly to will to run eagerly on, and sink faint amidst our struggles. The tongue is powerless, the familiar strength fails the body, nor will words or utterance follow. So the disastrous goddess brings to naught all Turnus' valour as he presses on. His heart wavers in shifting emotion. He gazes on his Rutulians and on the city, and falters in terror, and shudders at the imminent spear. Neither sees he whither he may escape, nor how rush violently on the enemy, and nowhere his chariot or his sister at the reins. As he wavers, Aeneas poises the deadly weapon, and marking his chance, hurls it in from afar with all his strength of body. Never with such a roar are stones hurled from some engine or ramparts, nor does the thunder burst in so loud a peal. Carrying grim death with it, the spear flies in fashion of some dark whirlwind, and opens the rim of the corslet and utmost circles of the sevenfold shield. Right through the thigh it passes, hurling on. Under the blow Turnus falls huge to earth with his leg doubled under him. The Rutulians start up with a groan, and all the hill echoes round about, and the width of high woodland returns their cry. Lifting up beseechingly his humbled eyes and suppliant hand, "I have deserved it," he says, "nor do I ask for mercy. Use thy fortune. If an unhappy parent's distress may at all touch thee, this I pray. Even such a father was Anchises to thee. Pity Daunus' old age, and restore to my kindred which thou wilt, me or my body bereft of day. Thou art conqueror. The Ausonia hath seen me stretch conquered hands. Lavinia is thine in marriage. Press not thy hatred farther." Aeneas stood wrathful in arms with rolling eyes, and lowered his hand. And now, yet more the speech began to bend him to waver, when high on his shoulder appeared the sword belt with the shining bosses that he knew, the luckless belt of the boy Pallas, whom Turnus had struck down with mastering wound, and wore on his shoulder the fatal ornament. The other, as his eyes drank in the plundered record of his fierce grief, kindles to fury, and cries terrible in anger, "Mayest thou clad in the spoils of my dearest, escape my hands? Pallas it is, Pallas who now strikes the sacrifice and exacts vengeance in thy guilty blood." So saying, he fiercely plunges the steel full in his breast, but his limbs grow slack and chill, and the life with a moan flies indignantly into the dark. End of section 24. End of the Aeneid by Virgil.